This is a manufactured crisis. Are numbers increasing because we have more asylum seekers? Yes. They are holding them in Border Patrol stations and treating them awful so that when they're calling back to whatever country they're from and saying, don't come here. You can't deter people who are claiming asylum. If somebody's claiming asylum and they have to leave their homeland, it's because they really are in dire strait.
You're listening to Find the Good News, Episode 65, The Honor First, a Beacon Series conversation featuring former senior Border Patrol agent and immigrant rights activist Jenn Budd. Find the Good News is produced by Parker Brand Creative Services, a branding agency that thinks sideways, pushes forward, and gets your brand up. See what else we do at parkerbrandup.com. Thank you for tuning your dial to this special Beacon Series episode of Find the Good News. With our Beacon Series, I'm attempting to bring you voices far from the region that I would traditionally call home, drawing in ideas and perspectives that we may not be used to discussing. In this Beacon Series episode, I'm joined by good newsy Laura Grantham Broussard in a conversation with former senior Border Patrol agent Jenn Budd. Jenn shares some very stark realities about her time in the Border Patrol. She tells the truth, and like most truth, it is sometimes hard to hear. I encourage you to listen to our entire conversation, no matter how you feel about the issues surrounding the United States-Mexico border. Next week, I share my conversation with local chef, owner of Luna, and founder of Chuck Fest, Dave Evans. Dave had a great energy, and I felt really blessed to have him share his story at the Right Round Table. You should really enjoy our visit. This is a great episode, so I'm not going to hold you up. So boost the power, adjust the gain, raise the antenna a bit higher than normal, point it towards the truth, and when the signal gets clear, press play on a little good news. I often say that we have to walk into the darkened recesses of the cave to find the truth. It's important to learn what is needed, then light lanterns on our way out, illuminating the way so the next travelers can get to that truth safer and with less suffering. I was reminded of this metaphor again when I recently spoke with former senior Border Patrol agent Jenn Budd as a part of the Beacon series on Find the Good News. Instead of going into the dark cave, we traveled along Jenn's road to the United States-Mexico border and her eventual exodus from the organization tasked with patrolling this contentious space between our two countries. I first heard Jenn Budd's voice through the content stream of Laura Grantham Broussard, who joined me in this important conversation with Jenn. And with each of her interviews, I could tell that she had a zeal for shining light on the toxic culture and corruption that has stained the U.S. Border Patrol long before the fervor of politically charged media interest in recent years. In our visit with Jenn, we learned that her dissolution with the U.S. Border Patrol and her subsequent willingness to step into the breach as an immigration rights activist did not come without deeply personal pain and suffering. Jenn survived her deeply traumatic ordeal in the U.S. Border Patrol, eventually surviving herself, then transmuting all of that scar tissue into a heart that burns with a passion to help others. Rhetoric regarding immigration, asylum, and the United States-Mexico border has been wielded by powerful voices as political weapons, and the image of a tumultuous border has been manipulated to turn a true humanitarian crisis into a profit source for many struggling communities and greed-driven companies. For many of us, these conversations about the border are based on speculation only, and the voices we are listening to often have little to no actual experience with on-the-ground border realities. This is not the case with Jenn Budd. Almost 2 decades ago, the current of life carried Jenn to the border to protect and patrol, but there was no one there to safeguard her from the very organization she had joined. Now, the tide of time has carried Jenn back to this line between our two countries, this area that changed her life, a bitter line that is being used to disrupt the quality of life on both its sides, with cruel decisions that will affect families for many generations to come. She, and others like her, believe in a safe and healthy border that is protected by communities working together, with open hands instead of closed fists, with compassion instead of cruelty, celebrating shared cultures, and working to promote a better border vision for all of us. This is Our Conversation with Jenn Budd.
Wake up this morning, you're dreaming up the story. I can hear the way it's going, 'cause you're laughing in your sleep. On the path to deliverance in a holy wall of light, pouring through your window.
Old news, bad news, fake news. Sometimes you want to shut those signals down and seek a better source. With my Find the Good News Beacon series, I tune into good people doing good works wherever I can find them. I scan across the full spectrum of life, seeking out human beings that have turned their dials towards helping others, aligning their time, resources, and talents with goodness, justice, mercy, and love. In each episode, I sync up with the hearts and minds of my extraordinary guests. We have dynamic conversations that invigorate the mind long after our transmission has ended. I discover the critical life experiences that shape them, the perspectives that drive them, and the fundamental beliefs that have anchored them to a path of goodness. There's a lot of background noise in the world. My name is Oran Parker, and I'm cutting through the static to find the good.
I love you just as well.
Well, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for inviting me.
This is great. This is a new series we're actually doing. We're calling it Find the Good News Beacon. Most of our original intent with this show was to basically create a positive information stream, but not a false positive information stream. I guess what I mean by false positivity is that sort of turning a blind eye to the troubles in the world and pretending like everything is sunshine and rainbows.
Right.
My perspective is that we have to walk into those dark places, but we don't have to stay there. We have to kind of find a way out. And so when I reached out to you, I was really excited to see this plan, which I read, and I've really enjoyed reading A New Border Vision. That was really exciting, because that's the kind of thing that I feel deeply, but don't really have a framework to talk about with folks, because I'm kind of a feeler, I guess. I base a lot of things on what my heart tells me. And sometimes heart work doesn't always line up with the realities of the work that needs to be done. But this plan was really, really in that kind of category, I felt like. But for the folks that are listening that really don't know who I'm talking to, if you don't mind, could you tell us who you are and kind of frame yourself the way you would like to be presented and let them know who I'm talking to?
So my name is Jenn Budd, kind of like the beer, but with 2 Ds. And I was a former senior Border Patrol agent in Campo, California, which is the mountains east of San Diego. And then I was also an intelligence agent at San Diego sector for about 6 years, in 95 to 2001. And I resigned out of disgust for the corruption and stuff of the agency, and felt it didn't jive with my core values and my morals. And it took me quite a long time to think about things and see things, but basically I've kind of turned into this immigration rights activist.
Yeah. So how does that happen? I mean, that's one of the questions that I wanted to ask. One of the things I've asked almost everybody that's been on this show is, why do something instead of nothing? I mean, you could have very easily had those feelings and those thoughts and felt like that the agency didn't align with who you are, but then you could have just walked away, but you chose to become a voice, right?
Yeah, and I did walk away for, quite a few years, and I realized that in 2015, I had discovered that I was suffering from PTSD from a lot of the things I went through in the patrol.
Really?
And in my life, and have been trying to seek help, but they were giving me some medications that didn't really work, and weren't addressing the issues. I'm not saying it's their fault. I think a lot of it was that I didn't recognize the trauma that I had endured, so I didn't think it was important. And I didn't like talking about my time in the Border Patrol, and so I just tried not to bring it up. And then I had a major suicide attempt in February of 2015 and should have died, but did not. And I just started realizing I needed to really stop hiding things and talking about it. And so I started talking about it, and then I started writing about it.
Wow, okay.
And and then the administration started separating children, and that was just as a kind of student of authoritarian regimes and corrupt governments. I was like, wait a minute, this can't go on, and I have to say something. And I didn't know if anybody would have wanted to listen to me, but apparently it struck a chord, and then I started getting more involved in thinking I need to do what I haven't done in the past, which was listen to migrants and their stories and listen to their perspective and how the enforcement policies, the enforcing I was doing with the policies, how it affects them. And that was, it was quite painful, really, to listen to that. And, but I think it's important to step into that pain and really experience, because I think it's when we step back into maybe the wrongs that we've done or trauma that we've had, that's really the only way that you can heal.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's kind of what's led me on this cause and keeps me going, really, honestly.
Yeah, that's actually all very powerful stuff, Jen. I didn't know any of that. I mean, I have no way to know, but hearing what you just said, I mean, to know that you experienced something that really drove you to that point, I mean, I would say probably despair, right? Was it a feeling of just like, okay, enough is enough? I mean, we have had that in our family too, a suicide attempt that was survived. And it is an opportunity to change and to open your heart up in a whole new way, and ignoring that pain like you described. I mean, gosh, I can relate to that so much of you've got a pain, or you've done something, or you've been involved with something, or just something's going on in your life that's just affecting you negatively, and you don't talk about it. It doesn't go away necessarily. It just sort of grows around and infects everything, and before you know it, it's filling up all those little crevasses inside and painting everything.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I'm a Southern girl from Alabama, and I grew up, in the 70s and 80s there in Huntsville, and I mean, to go into a psychiatrist was something that us crazy Californians did. that wasn't necessarily anything that was on my mind, and so certainly didn't think that it would work or help or anything. But I do feel really that part of the reasons why I joined the Border Patrol, of wanting to serve the country and wanting to help citizens and help anybody, really, not even citizens, but be of service to my community, is the same thing that still stays with me. I just chose the wrong organization. And I say the wrong organization because it's being used by politicians, and was starting to be used by politicians like Clinton back in the day when I was an agent, and that's when all this kind of started. I don't agree with open borders, and I do feel that we need a border patrol, but I'm more saddened. I don't hate them. I'm more saddened by what I know they should be doing and what they could be doing.
Yeah. So that's something that I scratch my head about, because for us, and I talk to my son about this a lot. We have, this is a topic that comes up in our conversations quite a bit. And sometimes I find myself having a difficult time answering some of his questions, because when we talk about the border, he's on, I guess, a side where he's like, well, should we have open borders? And I said, that's not going to work. But I also don't believe we have to maybe secure the border with a fist. And I wonder what you think about that, because he and I talk about this a lot, and I go, I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I'm just a layperson. I don't live on the border, but it's an issue that comes up so often, and it obviously affects a lot of people on both sides of the border. And compassion is something that I lean towards first. I would always say I would rather try that before I try anything else. I think having to resort to force or anything that's mandatory should always be second. I think we should always try to do something more that has a more a more peaceful tone to it, or that considers a bulk of people more and what's best for everybody, not just one individual. But I say all that to mean, basically, I just wonder, in your experience, I mean, is that even a possibility? Do you really believe that you can have a secure and safe border that is managed with compassion?
Absolutely. 100% I believe in that. And, I think that those who are inclined to separate people and divide us are the ones that say we either have to have an iron fist with the border, or you're either for open borders. And that's just not the case. And when you talk to people, and I talk to plenty of people who are Trump supporters and stuff, and when they start talking to me, at first they're really confrontational, and they're like, oh, you're just for open borders. And then it comes down to the fact that I'm not for open borders, and they realize, oh, wait, maybe we can agree on something. And so part of the problem is nobody ever asked the citizens who live down here, what do you think would work? What do we need to do so that you can, and that's what that piece from the Southern Borders Community Coalition that I gave you, that's what they're trying to give to people, instead of, because a lot of times, like, the Democrats are kind of just Republican light, or have been Republican light on immigration and border issues. But we can have, and we do need, a border patrol that is out here for because there are bad people just like there are in any community. And so we need that law enforcement for narcotics, and we need that enforcement for people who do cross and get in danger. We need that enforcement in case there are, on the off chance, somebody really bad, a terrorist, a rapist, whoever.
Right.
But that's less than 1% of the people who are coming to our southern border. And so I think what I always tell people is that we are, and we have, it's not just a Trump issue. We've been doing this for forever. We are using a law enforcement tool to deal with what is predominantly a humanitarian crisis.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to get anywhere. And so what I envision, and I think what southernborders.org envisions, is that we ask the local community, as well as law enforcement, as well as people from national security, and we come together and say, this is what we need. And we start realizing that the future of migration is climate change, refugee, asylum-seeking people. Mm-hmm. And to bury your head in the sand is just going to make the problems worse, instead of welcoming and helping people who can become productive parts of our society and make this country greater. And instead, because when you separate families and you divide families, you are in the future just going to create more problems.
Yeah.
You're in the future are denying people the opportunity, which then forces people into crime. So you're just going to create more problems for yourself in the future.
Yeah. Well, that's one, you're right. I mean, these children and these parents, I try to imagine every time I see this happening, I immediately put myself into the situation, because look, I have young children, and my youngest is 8 years old, and he and I have a very close, loving bond, and I sleep with him every night. And every night when I lay in a warm bed with him and he falls asleep, I think about, what would I feel like? just as a human man, if my child, if this boy that I love at this age was taken from me. And then on top of that, what would I do to give him safety, to get so that he doesn't have to live in fear? What would I be willing to do? And so I put myself in those shoes and I go, well, really anything. And then on top of that, when I imagine being separated from him, the emotional trauma that's going to cause me and him, it's going to build a type of resentment towards the entity that has done this to me. And this is where I've always said this is where terrorism is born. This is where extremism is born. This is where hate is born. It doesn't just come, well, now granted, there are people who are taught to hate, but you can become hateful in a vengeful way if something cruel was done to you. And I think about that when I see these stories and I look at these detention centers and the news just constantly feeding this stuff out, and I go, how many people is hate being born in their hearts towards just America in general? And I hate to see that, because when I was younger, I wanted to believe we were the good guys.
Right.
You know, I mean, I really did. And I've as the years are going by, and especially in the last several, I've just went, are we anymore? Yeah, maybe collectively still we have this opportunity that maybe some people don't, but the authorities just don't seem like the good guys anymore. It just seems like it's gotten cruel, if that's the word I would have to use again. Well, did you sense that? I mean, when you're in your time in the Border Patrol, like a level of vindictiveness or maybe even cruelty or a power?
It was starting to get that way. I know that the buzz talk, and what people read in the newspapers and online articles is that a lot of the problems with the Border Patrol had started after 9/11, and that is true to a certain extent, but it also was going on, I want to say around 98 and 99, when Clinton started to push even more so than he had then in 95 when I got in, and we saw a lot of trainees that they've gotten through the academy, but they haven't even had their full background checks and stuff. So, and then just yesterday I found out that a lot of the agents that were hired under Bush after 9/11 and the push, they only had 52 days of training, which is just absurd. And then on top of it, they didn't even do the background checks on a lot of these guys. So
why is that, do you think? Is it just a mad dash to fill the ranks, or what?
Yeah, it's just a mad dash to fill the ranks, and nobody stood up and said this is it. I mean, nobody's willing to stand up and say this isn't appropriate and this is what's happening. And another part of it, frankly, is if Border Patrol was policing Louisiana or California or somebody who had a representative, this would have stopped much sooner. But the fact is nobody represents immigrants. They don't have a voice. And so it's very, even our very liberal Dianne Feinstein, our senator out here, was quite anti-immigrant on a lot of votes. And so it's not necessarily anything that politicians have had to pay any price for. With Republicans, they get more votes if they're really hard on immigrants. And with Democrats, I think that they're afraid to be too light on immigrants. So I just wish people could listen to all sides and do what they feel is right, instead of always trying to put it through the how many votes am I going to get.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No, I do. It's one of the things I wrote down when I was kind of meditating on what we would talk about. And I had to search my own heart, because, again, I have conversations with people I love and people I care about, but this always comes up as sort of the source of contention, because I find that we end up not seeing eye to eye. And one of the things that always comes back to me is that the politicizing of the issue, and it totally dehumanizes people. I mean, when they get run through the engine of politics, it's like our humanity and dignity just gets stripped away, and we become an apparatus for votes. And even like you mentioned earlier, I don't know if we were recording yet, but we were talking about, Louisiana's this revival of all of these old prisons and buildings, being used as detention centers now. I mean, when you do the research on that, look, Laura, by the way, Laura's here.
Hi, Laura. Hi.
I mean, Laura works directly in this. I mean, so look, how many are there in Louisiana?
There are 11 now. 11
detention centers.
When we last spoke, when I was a guest on the podcast, there were 2.
Wow. Since the last time you were here. So, I mean, that's a huge escalation. In less than a year, we went from 2 to 11.
Yeah.
And so
the goal is 15,000 ICE prisoners in Louisiana by the end of the year. That's ICE's stated goal, which is about the number of beds that were cleared out when our governor and when that package of criminal justice reform bills passed. So these are rural towns that relied on the jails for their local economies. So they were quick to jump on those contracts with ICE, and that is why like when I last spoke to you, I was working directly in the community with asylum seekers who had been paroled. Well, nobody's getting paroled anymore.
Right, because filling a bed and filling a room, you're creating an economy and a boost to the economy. And there again, there's where we're dehumanizing people and they just become dollar signs.
Well, and it's this industry of warehousing people in California now. Gavin Newsom, the governor, has decided that there won't be any private detentions anymore for immigrants. And so what GeoCorps has done is now they're getting into building homeless housing for people. And they're most likely going to use the police to round up the homeless people to fill the beds. So this concept of they act like they're a normal business, like a hotel chain who says, to be productive and to pay our employees and cover our costs, we need to have 60%, fill up rate of 100% of our hotels, and that's how they're looking at it. But we're talking about people's lives here. We're not talking about filling hotel rooms. We're talking about taking people's freedoms away. And I think a lot of these towns, like what you guys are talking about that you're seeing in Louisiana, frankly, I think the local officials, the sheriffs and the mayors and city council and stuff, I think citizens need to address and say, we're worth more than this. We've voted you in to make sure that we are safe and to make sure that we have an economy and that we have jobs in our community. And just going out and building prisons left and right and making us watch people all day long who, and that puts you in a bad position as well. I mean, I think Louisianans have a right to ask for a little bit more out of their representatives than just laziness of saying, well, I'll just get my money from ICE kind of thing and make you work at a prison. So I think it's bad. It sounds
terrible when you frame it that way. It's right. I mean, we don't talk in that kind of language. It's all dressed up completely differently. But when you say it plainly like that,
out of detaining people, and I really think locally that's where it's at, because people are always like, what can I do? What can I do? And it's like, don't look at the federal level, look at the local level. And if you don't want your community and your mom and dad and then the sons and generations to be making their living off of detaining people who are coming here to try and save their children, then you have a right to say so. And if your elected official is not willing to do that, then vote them out and get something else.
I have a question. If we can pause for a moment on that and just kind of go back in time a little bit. I'd love to hear more about sort of your journey and what drew you to the Border Patrol, and then what you kind of envisioned it was going to be like versus the reality of what it was like, and then how much time did that take before, I guess, the honeymoon phase wore off with the Border Patrol?
So I was mostly raised in Alabama, and mostly in Huntsville, which is northern Alabama, and I went to Auburn University, and then after I graduated, I went back home and I was thinking about going to law school. But I had grown up in a very traumatic, I guess, kind of household. My mother is a severe alcoholic, and my father dealt with it by always being away and having affairs and stuff and never being around. And so kind of like when I was at Auburn, I realized, hey, that's not normal.
Yeah, right.
And when I came back home, I'm like, I got to get out of here. And somebody said, the Border Patrol is hiring. And I went, the what? Because I had never heard of the Border Patrol, I'm an Alabama girl. Mexican food or anything to me was like Taco Bell. That's all I knew. I took French in high school. I didn't take Spanish.
Yeah, it wasn't like you had some deep passion for like heading to the border, right?
I'm a white girl. I don't have any, it's like mostly French and Irish and me and German, but so I was like, okay, it sounds like a federal agency. They offered me I figured it was like the FBI but uniform and on the border, and they offered me a job in San Diego, and I am a gay woman, and I knew I was gay back then, and so it was like, well, that sounds pretty good to me.
Yeah.
So I joined, and I started getting an inkling that I had joined something let me back up and say that they had told me that it was basically about drug smuggling and that kind of stuff.
Right.
They didn't mention families or anything like that. And so,
well, yeah, you're thinking, okay, these are the bad guys. Like, it's painted like there's a big foil for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And when they said that there were people who crossed illegally, it was like, okay, well, that's illegal. It certainly from, the kids say they call it privilege, which I think is a good word for it. So from my privilege, I'm like, well, that's the law, without considering why they're crossing or understanding why they're crossing. And so, but at the academy, I had learned pretty quickly that there was a difference between men and women in the academy. And the men they separated us the very first day, and the women got this talk that was supposed to be about our hair and how to wear our makeup and stuff in uniform. And there was only 6 of us. So there's like roughly 10% of us were women starting in the class, but only 2 of us graduated. And Border Patrol female numbers are way low. They're always at 5% and never higher. And they say it's because it's really rough, but that's not why, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Okay.
But, so we're all looking at each other like, what are they talking about? It felt like 5th grade sex ed class or something.
Yeah.
Like that. But we had to sit in there and wait, and because the men were still talking. I'm like, what are they talking about in there? And they told us afterwards that the instructors, who were all male, told them that women did not belong in the Border Patrol, and that the only way, and that we couldn't physically do the obstacle courses and the runs and stuff like that. And the only way that we got through it was we would falsely accuse either our classmates or the instructors of sexual assault or outright rape, and then we would file equal employment opportunity claims, and so then they would just be forced to hire us to get rid of the lawsuit.
Wow, so they're basically saying that you're just sort of like a token hire, basically, to appease. Wow, okay. Interesting.
So that night, we didn't have any female agents that came to talk to us except about our hair. There we go.
Wow, that blows my mind, actually. I had no idea.
Yeah. And then...
What year was this, Jen?
1995, June of 1995. I actually entered on my birthday, so, yeah.
Oh, wow.
But, so maybe the last week of June, early July, maybe. But, so then, at the time, there were 10 classes going through the academy. This was in Georgia. And they staggered them 2 weeks apart. So every 2 weeks a new class would come in. And I was in the 288th. And so all the women that were still around from the other classes that were ahead of me, they come to at Glencoe in Georgia, we had, it's an old military base. So each townhome was divided amongst, this townhome's a woman's townhome, this townhome's a man's, and they did it like that. And there were like 3 or 4 bedrooms in each townhome. And, but the women in the classes ahead of us would come to our townhouse at night in the dark, like at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night when nobody's paying attention, to tell us what was really going on and tell us what we need to be aware of. Mm-hmm. It's very negative. I know we want to be positive on this show, but basically... Well,
no, the truth's better. Let's hear it.
Okay. Don't ever leave your drinks unattended because you will get roofied.
Really?
Your drinks will get drugged, and don't ever go into their townhomes alone. And if you do get drugged, you'll find yourself in their townhomes, and they play this game that they play at all the academies called the game of Smiles, where they drug a woman and force her to provide oral stimulation to one of the men, and the first one who smiles has to drink. It's like the worst kind of frat house you can imagine. And then with the instructors, if the instructors like you and choose you, you had better do whatever they want, or they will fail you on your Spanish boards, which are verbal, so they're subjective. And I saw this happen to plenty of women. And that's just how it was. For me personally, I didn't have any instructors that wanted to date me, so that was good. But I did go home from the bar one night. I think I had had a beer, maybe 2 beers, but I wasn't drunk. And I was walking across campus, and then one of my classmates came up to me and said, "Hey, let me walk with you so, you can be safe." And I'm like, I'm naive. I'm 24, but I'm still relatively naive, I guess. And I thought, we're on a campus full of soon-to-be federal agents. I mean, how much danger can I be in? He goes, well, you never know. Now, as an adult woman, I would be like, doing, I'd be like, uh-oh, watch out for this person. But I didn't back then, and he ended up sexually assaulting me outside of my townhome and beat me up, and everybody knew it because I had the visual scars on my face. And then they made me fight him the next day in physical training, and they laughed about it and thought it was funny, so everybody knew about it.
They knew what happened.
They knew what happened. And then, I didn't want to file this complaint.
I mean, that's like right at the beginning of, you're not even an agent yet at this point, right?
No, I was 3 months in. I still had another month to go. And I, he was like 6'5". I'm 6'4", 6'5". I'm 5'5", and back then I was in really good shape. I don't know. He probably had 100 pounds on me easily. But I didn't want to file a complaint because I knew that they would stop my training if they did to investigate it. And besides, he's not my supervisor, so EEO doesn't qualify for that. But they wouldn't allow me to call the police because they said it was a federal academy and they wanted to settle it themselves. And
wow.
So I just said, I just don't want you to. I'll fight any guy. I understand that, I can't pick and choose the size of my attacker. I get that. That's fine. But I'm not going to fight this guy anymore. And if you make me fight him, then we will be looking at legal action. And so they tried to fail me on my final PT run by less than 1 second. And so when you fail your PT, your final physical training, they'll everybody gets 1 retake. And I just made sure I smoked it. And then they couldn't do anything about it. And I think they sent me out to Campo because they thought I wouldn't make it. I was the only woman out there for quite some time. And they didn't give me a bulletproof vest for at least a year because they said they didn't have any for women, which is ridiculous.
That is so strange. Gosh.
So it was pretty right at the beginning. But I will say that I didn't understand that it was systemic. I didn't understand. I mean, the women told us this stuff, but in all honesty, it was like, oh, come on. And I really thought that I had some sort of control over how I was perceived, or, if I just worked really hard and did a good job, then I would be accepted. And I just did not get through my head for at least a couple of years that I would never be accepted, and that really no woman really is in the Border Patrol. So.
Interesting. First of all, I got to say I'm sorry that happened to you, because it shouldn't happen to anybody. And I can see now why. I mean, just hearing what you said about, your mother and then your father being absent, and then you go into this organization and you're going, hey, I'm going to do this, and then what happens in there. You were talking about suffering and trauma and pain and how we have to enter that sometimes to see what has happened to other people. You've had your fair share, and you have entered into it. I mean, I guess the silver lining, if you can even call it that, or the ray of hope, is that you're using that pain and that trauma to do good. I mean, really.
I think so. It's, I often say that I was not appreciated and wanted in my family, and so I can definitely say that I had this need to belong. And I think that's what led me to the Border Patrol. And it felt like, because my grandfather was in the Army, he was a colonel in the Army, so I knew that kind of system, and the Border Patrol's a little like that. Right. And I felt like, if I did the work because I have the badge and I wear the same colors, then we're all a team, right?
Right.
And so, but, and it's still to this day when I talk to agents and they're in that uniform, it's very strange to me because I have this not anger towards them, but I have this PTSD kind of reaction when I'm around them. And at the same time, I care for them.
Yeah.
Because they're my family. And so
wow.
It's very difficult. But I do think one of my friends who's a very big evangelical Christian said that there's a reason that God put me in that green uniform. So there you go.
Transformation. God, we talk about that a lot on this show, and I sometimes never know what we're going to talk about on this show, and I honestly didn't expect to hear about 80% of what you've said so far, and that's really what I'm hearing is transformation. I mean, you're in a particular position with a particular history, with particular pains that you are utilizing to transform yourself, and then and to hopefully transform, I mean, the border. Honestly, the way we treat the people coming across the border, the way the border's managed, it's an interesting place to find yourself. It's probably nowhere near where you imagined yourself to be when you were 20 years old.
Right.
No, and not even, like in 2015 with my suicide attempt, I'm like, I'm like done. And now look at me, and it's, and the thing about it is that's interesting to me too, is that I get so many criticisms and people are like, well, the Border Patrol can do no good in your eyes. And I'm like, that's not true.
Yeah.
They do a lot of good, but they're also doing a lot of bad. And I want to see them be good. I want to see them reach their potential. And I don't know if the agency can go on with as much as has happened, or if it needs to be another new agency. I'm not sure. But, I mean, we definitely have to deal with the corruption. We have to deal with the problems. So.
I read somewhere, and I wonder what you think about this. I don't remember the article or the date, but it was something I read, and it was pretty interesting, and it was interviews with some folks that are currently working in the Border Patrol, and they said that for years nobody cared about them or knew who they were, and nobody was talking about them, and now they're miserable because they feel like they've been demonized.
I was actually interviewed. I think
we were under the cover of dark for so long.
I think it's interesting. People ask me, what's the one phrase I would give to describe the Border Patrol zeitgeist, I guess, of the agents and how they feel, their overall, how would I sum it up? And I would say low self-esteem. Because for the longest time, like when I first got in, we didn't even have enough gas sometimes to take our vehicles out. We'd have to go walk out, on foot. And we just had no money. We lived up there in Campo in trailers and stuff. And nobody put any money into Border Patrol or immigration agencies and stuff, and nobody cared. And we're not seen as typical law enforcement. And that kills Border Patrol agents, especially after 9/11, because they desperately want to be seen as the heroes. Yeah. They desperately, because these are a lot of these people, a lot of these guys that go into the Border Patrol a lot of times have tried to get into other agencies. Not all of them, obviously. I wasn't, but a lot of them have. And they've not been allowed to because maybe they can't pass the psych eval. There's no psych eval for Border Patrol.
Oh, really?
So the standards are much lower for getting into the Border Patrol. They're even lower than when I was an agent. But they, they're getting into that, they want to help people. They want to protect the country. And so then they want more attention. And now that they have more attention and people see what they're actually doing, to them, because they've been raised in this institution that gives them all this propaganda from anti-immigrant hate groups and feeds it to them, they really feel, and this is the way they speak now, which is different than how we were trained back in the day, they really feel that we're being invaded.
Yeah.
And they say that, and they call asylum seekers prisoners. So the mentality that they have, and because they're so insulated in this Border Patrol family, so now they're getting all they want. Now Donald Trump's like, yeah, I love you guys, you're great. They're getting to be next to him, standing up at the podium, and they're loving it. And it's killing them that people think that they're not heroes, and that they're racist, and that they're bullies. And it's like, but you guys are,
Right.
And as an agency, you are. You may not feel like you are because you have been raised and fed this information for decades, but you are,
Yeah.
and I don't think, like I said, it took me many years after I got out of the patrol to look back on it and to see the institutionalized racism and propaganda and how it's being used by politicians on both sides. And it's not benefiting the agents. It puts the agents in more danger, and it's not benefiting the American citizens, and it's not benefiting the immigrants. It's benefiting the politicians.
You said a word I would, as one of the things I'd wanted to talk about was that word invasion. That's a word that gets thrown around so much. And if we don't live on the border, okay? I mean, the border is an idea and a concept. And yeah, I've driven down to the border, like in Brownsville, but it was pretty tame. It would look like any other metropolitan kind of city. And then there's a border wall and entry points. And I remember a friend of mine and we had to go to some video work down there, actually. It was a video about the drug pipeline from Brownsville to Lake Charles. And so we were tasked to drive down to the border and then film all these different spots on the way back. Before we went with our client kind of told us, now look, be careful when you get down there. And they gave us all this, I don't want to say hype talk, but we really, in our mind's eye, this is 4 or 5 years ago, so this is pre-Donald Trump. In our mind's eye, we both literally kissed our wives goodbye and thought we're some, combat photographers heading down to the border. I mean, I'm not even joking. That was literally what and we're adults. Right. I mean, adults, so we're going, okay. We head down to the border, and when we get there, we're like, where's all the smoking ruins and the drugs?
Pretty sleepy down there.
It was pretty tame. And so we had breakfast and we went to bed and we got up and we really literally drove around Brownsville trying to find something insidious looking to film.
Right.
I mean, it's the truth. We did. And so we ultimately ended up not finding what we were looking for. It all just looked like a bunch of people walking around, pretty normal. And so we ended up just filming at one of these checkpoints that you go drive through. We just did a little drive through to show them sniffing under the car and all that. But on our way back, we come back and look at that footage and we were like, that was the biggest psych up that I think I'd ever been in, because it just was not. And granted, that may be one location, but I guess for me, all these years later, fast forward 4 or 5 years later, I start hearing words like invasion, a horde of people, and some of the other words that are being thrown about. And I was like, I wasn't so quick to jump on it. I wasn't so quick to bite because I was like, I've been sold this before, and it wasn't like that. But there's a lot of people that are being sold that, and because they don't have eyes on it, they don't realize that it's not real. It's sort of like a movie gets played in your mind. And so I wonder if you could just share, what is the reality like working on the border? I mean, in juxtaposition to the word invasion.
Well, okay, so I think we had talked about this before we started recording, but in 1995, the total number of agents on the southern border was less than 5,000. And in 96 as well. So in 1995, we had 1.2 million apprehensions. And in 96, I believe it was 1.5 million apprehensions with less than 5,000 agents. They have 20,000 agents now. So that's 4 times as many. And the average that they've been getting for the last 5 to 10 years has been about 400,000 a year. So that's quite a significant drop. Now, I know last year, fiscal year 2019, because the federal fiscal year ends in October, so it just ended. They had a little over 800,000. I think it's like 811,000, and then más o menos a few. And so it has increased, but still, if you just calculate the numbers with a force that's increased 4 times as much, and they have helicopters and Black Hawk helicopters and cameras and all this stuff that we didn't have anything like that. We tracked their footprints. That's how we did it. And then people will say, Well, back then you didn't have as many asylum seekers. It was mostly single Mexican males. And statistically, that's true. But out in Campo, I arrested plenty of families. The very first group I ever arrested was a family. And I was so confused because I was like, okay, where are the drugs? Where are the weapons? And then there was nothing. And so this is a manufactured crisis. And now, are numbers increasing because we have more asylum seekers? Yes. Yeah, that is increasing, and it does take more time to process asylum seekers, but it doesn't take as long as what they're doing and how they're holding them in detention for a long time. They're purposely holding them in detention so that when they either before MPP, when they were paroled into the United States to be with family, and then also after MPP, where they're being sent back to Mexico to wait for their hearings, they are holding them in Border Patrol stations like that and getting them sick and treating them awful, so that when they're waiting for their hearings, they're calling back to whatever country they're from and saying, don't come here. It's awful. This is what it is. So that's what they mean by deterrence. They say, oh, we need to deter people by putting them in jail. And it's like, you can't deter people who are claiming asylum. I mean, that if somebody's claiming asylum and they have to leave their homeland, it's because they really are in dire straits. Nobody just gets up and leaves their homeland and travels thousands of miles to another country that doesn't speak the same language, that has a completely different culture. You know, that's just American exceptionalism that we have in our mind. That's, xenophobia.
Sure.
There are some people that maybe see American television shows or whatever and like, oh, I would like to be an American, and typically they do it the right way, but the vast majority of people aren't dragging their kids. You wouldn't drag your kids.
No, I mean, I'm listening to you say that. I mean, and again, putting it back into my own life, just trying to compare it to myself. I don't much want to move to a new city in the same state. It's hard. I mean, and all the work and the logistics, and I have stuff and I've got resources. And some of those things might be like, well, I don't really have any family there, or, well, I don't have my childhood friends there. That's all my little privilege deciders. I can't even imagine just taking off to another country with my everything I own in tow,
Yeah, and in a way, it's kind of like, I tell Americans, it's kind of a good thing that, in a way, that we don't understand their straits, because what it says is that our way of living is at such a level that it's difficult for us to understand their way of living and what poor means. So poor to an American, especially a white American, is much different than what poor to a Honduran person is, or to a Guatemalan person. So that's kind of cool, because that means we have a really wealthy society and we're doing good as a country. But on the other hand, it's kind of bad because we've gotten away from being able to understand other people and empathize with them. So there's kind of this catch-22 where we want to provide for people and we want to take care of ourselves. But then that isolationism and not knowing about other cultures and what they're going through and how our policies are affecting them and causing them to have to leave their homes and come here. That's part of our problem of being in our privilege, I guess.
Yeah, no, I totally see that. I mean, I find this is a very hard subject to talk about with folks. I had a conversation with a dear friend the other day, and I don't think we necessarily saw eye to eye. We had a peaceful conversation, which is rare, and I think the fact that we were dear friends is what kept it that way. But what I thought about in leaving the conversation later, I thought if we weren't dear friends, that conversation probably wouldn't have been so peaceable. We were making efforts to have elevated discourse, even though we didn't necessarily see eye to eye, we could share points with each other without angering each other. But what I find more often than not is that it gets really ugly really quickly, and that's new for me, because I don't really get that. I don't fully. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around why it's so hard to have a conversation, because when someone says, well, I kind of feel for those people, just something as simple as that can sort of trigger angry discourse.
Yeah,
I know.
Can I jump
Go
in?
ahead.
Yeah, please.
I see a lot of discourse passed around that is being parroted by and also seeded out by the administration, Stephen Miller, and then the agents and that Facebook group that was discovered.
1015.
Right? Just the idea that, well, especially Central American migrants, they've been taught to say that they're going to seek asylum, but they won't follow through with that because our asylum laws don't really apply. And so our asylum laws are like a Cold War era set of laws that, they apply pretty well to Cubans, Cameroonians, Somalis, Ghanaians. They don't necessarily apply well to Central Americans. Nicaraguans, yes, but not to Hondurans, not to Guatemalans, and not to Salvadorans, usually because most of them, not all, but most of them are fleeing pervasive, all-permeating gang violence.
Yeah.
And our immigration courts, most IJs view that as just, they call it random criminality. And they don't view it as persecution based on one of the protected grounds.
Okay.
And with a nexus to, between the persecution and the protected ground, that the government is unwilling or unable to stop or punish. And so that's true. And so there is motivation to get through a credible fear interview, and then, if you're paroled, not follow through with seeking asylum if you know enough to know that you're not going to get asylum.
Right, I see what you're saying.
And so the whole idea is we have to detain them to make sure that they show up to court so that we can deport them because they're removable.
Right, we're gonna remove you anyway. But yeah, I see.
Detained proceedings move. They're expedited. People do end up languishing in detention for a long time because the appeals process can be so long. And if you are lucky enough to either hire an attorney or have access to pro bono counsel, then you can go through. You can have a bond hearing and all these things that make the process take longer. But yesterday we discovered a secret program that they've piloted in El Paso called PACR, PACR, and it's they're keeping people. They're gonna do this super expedited asylum process in Border Patrol facilities, and attorneys have no access, no in-person access.
It's completely illegal.
I know. There's no way. There's no due process.
But basically, this administration does whatever it wants.
And then waits for the lawsuit. Take us to court. Keep the ACLU busy, and there's so much to sue over that it takes forever.
Right, they've made a long, bumpy, gnarly tail, and they know it. It's you're never going to catch the end of it anyway. So we'll just do what we want.
So the what people say, and it gets filtered down through people who aren't intimately familiar with the immigration court system or with Border Patrol or with ICE, but the uniforms are the good guys, the president's the good guy, and these are just economic migrants with a third world mentality, and if they come in here, they're going to spread their third world mentality, and that's what Louisiana's going to become. Well, I'm sorry, have you looked at any statistics about Louisiana lately?
Right.
Or ever?
Right. That's what I find more than anything.
Our standard of living is...
Well, yeah, and I don't know a lot. You're right. I take that common man approach to most of these conversations because most of the conversations I'm having are with common people.
Right.
And what I realize is that we don't know enough. That's just what it boils down to. And the issue, just as you said, is
we also don't listen to experts.
Well, that's true.
Decide we know.
Even then, a lot of the experts, you would think that Tom Homan, former commissioner of ICE, would be an expert, but he repeats statistics that are from these anti-immigrant hate groups.
Right.
So,
that's true. Absolutely true.
I feel that if you knowingly and purposefully mislead the public as a public official, you should not be a public official, because he'll say upwards of 90% of asylum seekers don't show up for their hearings.
And that's a
not
lie.
True. It's actually the opposite.
Right.
you know? So, and I think a lot of ordinary citizens, like you're saying, what they hear is, people, asylum seekers are coming here and they just say, I fear for my life, and I was raped, or I was beaten up by a gang, or my life was threatened, and then we give them asylum. It's actually really
so
difficult to get asylum.
I've sat in on trial after trial in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, the majority of people who are what they term out of status or undocumented in this country came here legally by visas and so forth. They've just overstayed their visas. So the majority of the people that the president is saying are undocumented and here and need to get out did not come through the southern border. So, you know, they came on a plane, and then they developed family and stayed here. And then, you know, so it's so that's the biggest thing, is just fighting the disinformation and stuff. And, you know, I always ask people when they're like, well, you know, they're going to come here and make this a third world country and but they know the loopholes on the law, and I'm like, well, which is it? They're so stupid,
right?
They're just going to make this third world country. And they're so smart that they know everything about our immigration laws.
And they're also taking all the jobs, but they're also all going to be public charges.
But they're all lazy,
all lazy, all going to rely on public assistance. But they took all the roofing jobs, all of them.
Yeah.
And you know, what you'll find, too, in communities like y'all's, is you'll find people saying, you know, that they'll repeat the rhetoric from Trump and from the Border Patrol and stuff. But then, you know, when ICE comes to town and raids the chicken plant and stuff, they're like, man, they took Maria. Maria and I were really good friends.
Right.
They took my housekeeper.
Well, that seems to me...
They took my housekeeper's husband. Yeah, I've heard that one.
And I'm happy, I know it. I'm helpless.
Sorry for interrupting the conversation, but I have something I need to tell you about. You may or may not know this, but this podcast is produced in the city of Sulphur, Louisiana, one of the sister cities that make up Southwest Louisiana. All of my childhood memories are wrapped up in the city of Sulphur. It's my home, and it's been a good home for most of my life. There is a growing diversity of unique businesses, services, and events in Sulphur, each with a rich and colorful story to tell about their particular place in this little jewel on the west side of the Calcasieu River. My mission is to promote good news, to put a positive signal out in the world. That's why my team at Parker Brand Creative Services has created the new brand, Sulphur Today. Here's how it works. Post your Sulphur event, service, photos, videos, or information using the hashtag Sulphur Today. That's it. My team and I will scan and curate those posts through the social media platforms we've put in place. Before you make your post, just type hashtag. That's a £sign for the folks that don't know what a hashtag is. And the words Sulphur Today with no space. My team at Parker Brand is monitoring this tag right now, and they're ready to create positive digital curb appeal for our city by sharing all the very best Sulphur has to offer through the Sulphur Today social media pages. As the Sulphur Today project grows, we will be scheduling interviews and video sessions with businesses, events, and services so they can tell their story of Sulphur Today in a series of ongoing micro-documentaries. Look for the eye-catching Sulphur Today sign when you're out and about. And be ready, we may be stopping by to visit you for a photo op. And don't forget to stop by the Parker Brand Creative Services studio in Sulphur to grab a Sulphur Today decal for your vehicle or business. We want people visiting our area to know that they can find all the wonderful things we have to offer with ease and be a part of our history by utilizing the Sulphur Today pages or by searching the Sulphur Today hashtag. Do you want to help us tell the story of Sulphur Today? Here's what I need you to do right now. Visit and like the Facebook page at facebook.com/Sulphur Today. And be sure to share positive Sulphur information and post often using the hashtag Sulphur Today. Now, back to Find the Good News. That seems to be a really big part of what's going on too, is that just what y'all just described, is that when it's not close to you, it's that out of sight, out of mind apathy. Mm-hmm. You know, it's very easy to to hate someone that you don't know, or to demonize them and paint them in a certain light and go, oh, those people over there. But when they're in your own family, or they're in your own community, or it's somebody that you have an intimate relationship with, that the bonds form and they become human. The language that I hear is all about dehumanizing and separating. You told a story in one of your interviews that I thought was really interesting. You'd said, and I'll let you tell it, but it was a story about you stopped a family at the border, and maybe a lawyer was with them, and he spoke really good English, and he asked you some questions about the Canadian border.
Yeah, well, when I was an agent, and I can, in my mind, I can see the exact hilltop I finally caught up to the group on, north of 94, north of Tecate, and it was nighttime, in middle of the night, and out in Campo, a lot of times you have to wait 2 or 3 hours for transport to get out to the middle of nowhere to find you. And so as my Spanish increased and got better, then I started listening to their stories and being able to understand. And this one man, who I think he was probably older than I was at the time, I was probably 26 or 27, and he spoke perfect English, and he had a law degree. And I said, what are you doing, crossing illegally? And he says, well, there's no jobs down there. Do you not know anything that's going on in Mexico? And I'm like, well, no, not really. Because I didn't have to. I didn't have to know, because I'm a white American and I'm wearing a Border Patrol agent uniform. And so we got to talking, and he said, do you, meaning Border Patrol, do y'all treat Canadians this way? And I said, well, there are Border Patrol agents on the Canadian border. And he said, but do y'all hunt them down in the middle of the night like this? And I said, I'm sure that, I think it's mostly Canadians coming across trying to avoid taxation on like cigarettes and alcohol or something like that, and bringing stuff back. But I said, no, it's not like the southern border. It's different down here. And he said,
and why is that any less criminal than...
so that's what he said. He's like, well, what's the difference? And I was like... But I'm looking around, and I'm all uncomfortable, because I'm realizing that my answer is going to be because you're Mexican, because of the color of your skin. And at first, I think I said something like, well, I think because a lot of Canadians are more educated. And he goes, I have a college degree. And I'm like, like,
I'm a lawyer.
You're trying to avoid the answer of what it's like under the skin. Like,
it really, and I remember we talked a lot, because it took so long I think they ended up having to send a supervisor or something out with a van. And then, so I'm walking him down the mountain and to the van, and he's the last one to get in, and he turns around and he says to me, you're a good person, and you need to think about what you're doing.
Wow. That's really sticky.
So how long after that was your whole like Saul to St. Paul transformation?
Well, a long time, because what I ended up doing is I got really tired of, I liked hiking, and I liked tracking, and I liked vehicle chases, and all that's really fun and all that. But the fact of the matter, it wears on you time after time, arresting families and people crying,
realizing
and kids
that you're
crying.
Hunting people. You're
hunting people, and it's kind of a cool skill to have if you're doing search and rescue. It's not a cool skill to have if you're hunting people.
Arresting.
And so I would take details, which are like special assignments I would put in for like a drug narcotics task force, and do that for a while. Or I do prosecutions for a while, and then that's how I ended up at intelligence, at Sector Intel. And my thought was, I won't have to arrest families, and I'll be getting the smugglers that are doing this. That's people that are, telling migrants to cross out in these dangerous areas, and, I'm still with the Border Patrol mantra about that and stuff. And then I found, as I developed these cases, and one case in particular against the boss of my old station, who was the one that was organizing the smuggling of narcotics into the county, that the Border Patrol did not care, and they would cover up for their agents for anything, and then they came after me. So it was like I tried to whistleblow, and I got shut down, and life was threatened. And so That's why I came home one night and I was just telling my wife, I'm like, I'm going to die out there. And for nothing. I mean, I agree with getting the drug smugglers. I agree with getting these people that are abusing the migrants, but it's just such a messed up system. It's such a messed up system. And I just had to leave.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably a good segue. I mean, we talked about going in the cave and then lighting the lamps on the way out. So that brings me to what I really want to talk about, and which I think is the good news, which is the new border vision that you shared with me. Well, I read through that document and I was like, yes. Not only did my heart kind of quiver as I read it, but then I started thinking, this is just good policy for dealing with your neighbors. This is good policy for dealing with people that you encounter in life.
Humanizing.
And so the way I kind of wanted to phrase that was, how do you secure the border and make it a healthy place and, not a place of discord amongst people and corruption, right? A place to be, used that could be politicized in a negative way. What does this vision look like, and what's your role in an advisory role, and how are you involved in that?
Well, what people need to understand, I think, is, and they don't realize, is there are a lot of organizations down here on the border that have been working on this for decades.
Yeah, this isn't new, decades. Right? This isn't just
no, it's not new to them because they've been living here and dealing with this. And as I compare it to when I was first an agent before the first wall went up with the Clinton administration. The kids used to come across and say, "Can I play on the flat field in Decatur?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, let's play soccer." And we play soccer with them. And it was more of a community back and forth.
Yeah.
And there were bad people, and we chased the bad people. But there were also, they were our neighbors, and what it's turned into after the fence came up, like I never ever got it rocked in my vehicle, where they throw rocks at your vehicle when you're going down the border road. I never had that until the fence came up. So
really?
The fence brought all that. Yeah. And it a lot of people don't realize, they think of the border as like San Diego, or they think of it as like El Paso, and they don't understand that there are thousands of miles in between all these big cities where there's all these little dots of towns, and we rely on each other both in the north and the south side to take care of each other. And there's families divided by these lines. And so it created a lot of animosity and a lot of pain and a lot of hurt and a lot of death, to be honest with you. And so what the Southern Border Community Coalition at southernborders.org has done is we realized that we don't want people who work in this area, they don't want it to just be all about what the anti-immigrant hate groups and this administration specifically is saying about immigrants, that we need to put out a message of good, healthy communities, and that there are communities down here on the border that are just like communities in Louisiana, and that they want their kids to go to good schools. They want their streets to be clean. They want their parks to be clean. They want clean air, clean water. They want to be able to go to church just like you can, and they want to be able to, feed their families and stuff without going down the street and being stopped by a Border Patrol agent every time they leave the house and ask their citizenship because they're brown. Or they don't want to send their kid down to the corner store for a jug of milk and worry that a Border Patrol agent's going to shoot him because he thought his cell phone was a gun.
Right.
And, they don't, this is what it looks like when you militarize a border.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, it's not just about the immigrants, it's about, or the migrants, it's about the people who
the
live
residents
here.
of the border.
The residents of the border, right. And it's just, it just makes common sense, and it can be done. And they want their border areas to be safe. They just don't want to live under this regime. And you really feel like it feels like a war zone when you're down there.
Really?
Totally. I can go down to the San Ysidro Port of Entry, which is the largest port of entry in the entire world. And I can, stand out there with a sign that says, asylum is not a crime. And all around me are the locals walking to and from the markets and the stores and maybe going through the port or whatever. And the majority of them are Latinos, and they will not say one word to me. And it is because they are the ones that live there. I'm a white woman that's coming from higher up in San Diego, and it causes them problems. So when I leave, they're the ones that pay the price. And so when we go into communities to protest, or we go into communities to say things, we always have to consider what the community says and what the community's needs are and what is good for them. Mm-hmm. So when we make laws about the border and we decide how we're going to enforce, we prefer to call it like a border governance instead of like border enforcement, because border enforcement is like saying, St. Charles enforcement, like you're all a bunch of crooks or something, as opposed to St. Charles governance, And so it's we want to have a say. They want to have a say in their communities, and we want our leaders to be listened to. And instead of just, this is what's going to happen, we're going to put, 2,000 Border Patrol agents down there in the San Ysidro area, and they have unlimited power, and they don't have to have search warrants, and they can do whatever they need to do to enforce the border, or police the border. So we just think that for far too long, this buildup that we've seen from the time that I was an agent to now, it's big business. These higher up agents, they leave the Border Patrol, they go work for defense contractors. I mean, the amount of money, I think when I was an agent, they spent on border projects and border agencies, they spent like maybe $1.6 billion a year. Now they spend about at least $24 billion a year, and yet less people are crossing, without inspection. So why is that we're spending more? So it's just about making our communities what we want them to be, what we think people should see. And then, all these border cities have been proven to have less crime than many American cities that are in the interior and stuff. But you don't hear that because that's not the rhetoric that goes out. So what this is asking for is just having a say-so and having, a little bit of discussion of how the communities down here on the border look, instead of looking like a war zone. Yeah, well, no, that's definitely going back to my experience, my little experience of going down there. It was like the language was all very scary. I mean, and all you have is your imagination to go on, and then you can imagine a lot of things, Well, and the Border Patrols encourage that because they find that the more that they hype that up to what you were talking about, your experience in Brownsville, and it's not to say that Brownsville isn't known for narcotic smuggling, it is, but the more that they hype that up, the more money that they'll get, the more people will consider them honorable and come to their aid, because that's how we are after 9/11, and we want to support our law enforcement officers and so forth. But in turn, this is what it causes: this false sense of chaos that's going on at the border, and that's not really what's going on at all. Yeah, and these human lives, I mean, migrants and asylum seekers are kind of caught in the process of this. I mean, just human people. Granted, I mean, amongst just my own community, I say this to people all the time, is that, there are bad people right here in your own community that are doing terrible things, You go street to street, and they look like you, and they go to church with you, and they shop at the stores you shop at, and you don't have those same fears because they feel like they're one of you. Mm-hmm. So we don't ask those questions. I mean, everybody should be given the benefit of the doubt, no matter where they're from, until they give you cause. Yeah, until they give you cause, and it's interesting because when you look at the statistics over all the years of immigrants, the percentages of criminals are less than 1%, but the percentages of Border Patrol agents who have been arrested for crimes is really, really high. It's like at least 15 to 20%. They think they think it's maybe twice as much of Border Patrol agents are corrupt. So, and that's one of the reasons why I left, was like the people that I arrested on a daily basis, their only crime was trying to seek a better life and a job and risking a lot to do it, and with their children. But the people that I worked with, well, let's see, they raped me, they've abused me, they've shot at me, they've, and it's constant. It's constant in the Border Patrol. And it's like, God, if you guys, I've never understood this. I've always felt like, if you guys would just deal with your bad agents, people will respect you a lot more because you're rooting out the, the bad seeds or whatever. But they don't do it. And so it's just,
well, it's like when that Facebook page came out, Laura, and you mentioned it earlier, and you started seeing what was being talked about.
I couldn't even look.
Yeah, I mean, the images blew my mind, and I thought, well, this is what you do, and this is the face of this entity when nobody's looking.
And it's the proof that it's systemic.
It backs up what you're saying. It's a culture.
Yeah, and and as soon as that came out, my phone started blowing up, and
I'm
I'm
sure.
like, yeah, and they said, is this normal? And I'm like, yeah, that's like nothing. And, that's normal behavior for Border Patrol agents. And I said, so Carla Provost will come out and say, this does not represent the men and women I know at the Border Patrol who are honorable and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And it's like, and sure enough, she did immediately. And then within 24 hours, the next thing that the commissioner, then McClellan, said, McAleenan, I think. Yeah, I have a hard time with his name. McAleenan said, well, we've known about it for 3 years, but we've been monitoring it. We use it as intel. And then CNN, I think, called me, and they said, what do you think of that statement? I said, well, that statement tells me that there's higher ups on there who are members, because
right.
Wow.
that's what they're saying.
We're monitoring the situation.
Art Del Cueto of the union's a member of it, and some other guy named Garza, I think, from the union is on it. And sure enough, Carla Provost is a member on it. But no, she didn't do anything unethical. It's like, come on, you guys, And then they just kind of wait it out, and nothing ever happens, and everybody forgets about it, about the patrol. And the next scandal, like this assistant chief who kidnapped a junior agent, and he kidnapped her and raped her, and he's being charged in Pima County in Arizona for it. And he's married to the chief, Gloria Chavez, of El Paso sector. But she's going out saying he doesn't represent the men and women of the Border Patrol. And it's like, he's been in the
your
Border
husband.
Patrol for 24 years. He's an assistant chief. Come on. You know?
Jen, I mean, how do you change this? I mean, it sounds like it's old and ingrained.
Well, you start by not tolerating it. I mean, you know, the first thing that Carla Provost did was she allowed him to resign after she knew he was being charged by this. And let me tell you, to be charged by another agency and not get that professional courtesy, that they might extend to you because you're also law enforcement, you must be really bad, and they must have some serious evidence on you for this.
Wow.
So this is really bad, what's going on with this guy. Assistant Chief Gus Zamora, I believe is his name. He's innocent until proven guilty, but it's, it's not looking too good. But she allowed him to resign, and therefore his Border Patrol career doesn't get tainted. He gets his pension. He gets to resign and all that other stuff.
Yeah.
He should have been allowed to resign. And then, even his wife, his wife all of a sudden is giving interviews, and she wouldn't give interviews before. And I don't blame his wife. His wife is not responsible for his behavior, not at all. But she is responsible as the chief in the United States Border Patrol. When she goes out and says, this is not like the men and women I know of the Border Patrol, it's like you're married to the dude. At least just be quiet about it and say no comment,
Yeah, I mean, unless you're really good at being two separate people, which, I mean, I'm not very, very good at it. I mean, you are who you are. I mean, he's not hiding that very well. You know what I mean?
Well, I have no doubt. I mean, he groomed her. You can see that
she's
just like they groom children.
Bit of a victim.
And
here.
I had a mentor in the Border Patrol that did that to me too, and I did not realize that I was being groomed for that. Not necessarily that this man would have sexually assaulted me, but that I was being groomed until this story came out, and it just really kind of like threw me for a loop. I'm like, man, it was just.
I got a question. So, like, when you finally did start talking about these things openly and honestly, what was the initial acceptance of your story? Were there a lot of voices going, "Wow, I can't believe that," and then just support, or were there people that were like, "I don't know about this"?
There's different categories. There's right wingers who are inclined not to believe anything, and they're like, "Oh, you're just a liar." It's like, why would I lie about this? I don't get paid to do this. Why would I lie about this? And they don't have much to do with the Border Patrol. But I had a lot of agents write me privately and thank me and tell me their own stories.
Oh, wow.
And how they're glad that somebody's finally speaking out. And then I have a lot of people on the left-hand side who go way far to the left and are like, I hate the Border Patrol. They should all be in jail.
Yeah.
A bunch of racists. And I'm not saying that I understand where these people are coming from because they're directly affected by this, obviously, and I understand where their anger comes from. Mm-hmm. But I also feel that we're not going to get anywhere in this society, lumping everybody into one giant.
Oh, right. Yeah. But Twitter's the best place for that. I love getting yelled at because attorneys and legal assistants we're just playing the game and keeping it going so we can make money. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You're making so much money in
immigration. It's a low bono immigration practice.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. My son and I have this conversation almost weekly, and I think it's because it bothers him. He's young. He's in high school, but he said, how do you do it, Dad? He said, how do we, when you're talking to somebody else and you go, well, you support this policy or you support this entity and these policies hurt people, how and I'm one of those people, let's say, as he says, he goes, I'm in that umbrella of people that could potentially be affected by this policy in the future. He said, how am I to not let their support of that taint my entire relationship with them, and so he's struggling with that right now. And I thought,
I'm still struggling with that at 33 years old.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, very difficult. And I think that's what I see happening in our country is or at least for me, my experience is I'm going, wow, you've got family members that you love who support people. They support people who support policies that hurt other people. And it's so hard.
It's like the Baldwin quote. Let me make sure I get it right.
I find that hard to navigate. I mean, because they go, yeah, my son has a point. I'm like, morally, and if you're trying to lean towards the long arm of justice for people, what is the right move here? I mean, how do you navigate that?
I think we have to realize that in our society right now, there's so much intentional polarization that I think the majority of Americans are really in that kind of day-to-day struggle, just trying to pay for their medical bills and take care of their parents and take care of their kids. And you have such a disparity of income, and I think that is what's lending itself to people polarizing themselves politically, and because everybody just feels so on the edge, and everything feels and kind of is at times so monumental and so desperate, Well, and go ahead.
Oh, I just think we are at a really, we're at a turning point as a nation, I think, where we have to really face, like, the colonial history of white supremacy. I just lost it because my phone died.
Oh, shit.
So I had a quote from James Baldwin, who is one of the most important American writers ever, and this one you see a lot, or at least I see it a lot lately, and it's that we can disagree and still love each other unless our disagreement is rooted in my oppression and your denial of my humanity.
Yeah.
Right. And I talk to right-wing people all the time. One kind of found me at Clint, Texas, outside of one of the detention centers a couple months back. And I said, we can talk, but you will not be rude, and you will not yell, and you will not curse, and we will agree to disagree on some things. And he did, and we had a really good conversation. And we didn't agree on everything.
Yeah.
But we had a very good conversation. He was surprised at how much we did agree on, and that I wasn't for open borders, and that I was offended when somebody ripped an American flag off and put a Mexican one up on some detention center, you know. And it's like, you know, I think that I certainly, not the media, but the way media is in sound bites and stuff tends to cause a lot of these issues. I don't like being on TV because it's so fast and you just don't really get to talk like we can here.
Yeah.
I love this venue.
Yeah, this setting is great.
Yeah, this way of doing it is fantastic. But I do really think that there's a lot to be said for this constant competition that our government and politicians have put us in, whether it's getting into the best charter school, or it's living in the best neighborhood, or it's having clean water versus lead in your water, or it's this or that. So I think, you know, we look back at our parents and grandparents after World War II, and they really, it's funny, a lot of them would say, oh, I did it all myself, and blah, 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 but they don't think of the things that were afforded to them by the government during those times that helped produce one of the strongest middle classes ever. Yeah. And we don't have that nowadays. And when you have insecurity, whether it's perceived insecurity or just around the corner insecurity that could happen if one person gets sick or your car goes down, that is a stressor, and that causes you to constantly, it's almost kind of a PT, it's like a national PTSD disorder that we have, where we're constantly looking out for the next shoe to drop. And if that means I got to take you out to protect myself and my kids, then I'm not going to agree with you, and you just go over there and sit in the corner. And I think that's a lot of it. I really do think that's.
Boy, you're speaking my language, honestly, because I talk about this all the time on this show. Is that our lives, the lives that we're living, really outpace our ability to keep up with them, and that just keeps us in. You said it, keeps us in this sort of state of survival mode, and where we're living in like a little layer of fear of what's next. You know, is if I don't have a client doesn't pay a bill, and then that throws me into this cycle of debt that I can't get out of, and that's a fear motivator. And so we end up being motivated by all these little fear factors, and it just keeps us in a ball of mess, and we can't think about our there's no time for tenderness and compassion and kindness and mercy and being good and helping my neighbor. I don't have time for that because I'm too busy just trying to hold it all together. And
I think everything feels like such a personal attack. And when people, they always hit me up on Twitter or Facebook and they say, what can I do? What can I do? But I live in Iowa. What can I do? I live in Oklahoma or something. And I'm like, you know what you can do? You can see your neighbor down the street who maybe is an immigrant or is from a different country, or maybe your neighbor wears a hijab, or somewhere in your city there's a Muslim group or something, and you can go and have dinner with that person and talk to them. That's all it takes. And if you're afraid of Muslims, then go and meet a Muslim and go have dinner with them, or make them dinner, or sit down somewhere and start talking. Not try to disagree, just start talking. Right. That's it. Yeah. And break some bread. And that's all you got to do to get this started.
Yeah.
That's all you can do.
It's so funny how little it takes to do that too. I'll tell you a little short story, and it's not earth shattering, but it was just a nice little illustration of what you're talking about. My son and I head up to North Louisiana every year in December, and we spend a little day together at a big Christmas festival up there. And we always kind of parked in the same spot, but last year there was nowhere to park, and I said, well, I think there's a church around the corner. I told him, I've been there many years. I said, there's a church around the corner that I think does parking. Well, when we went around the corner, we saw that church was a mosque for students. And so we stopped and we pulled in, and the guy came out and we talked, and I'm wearing a crucifix, and he had come out with the kids, and they took our money, and we ended up talking for like 30 or 45 minutes, and it was just this loving, invigorating dialogue. And then my son and I left, and that's a small little encounter, but unfortunately, I said, we were walking through the crowd, we actually heard some other people going, I'm not parking down there, a bunch of and I was like, wow. And my son was just like, this really blows my mind how within just moments of one encounter you can have the exact opposite encounter. And I said, and that's what's going on right now in our culture, in our country. We got to have these little encounters more often, is basically what he and I decided. Is that just exactly what you said, in these small ways. It doesn't have to be this big thing that you have to profess, right? It can just be these a small meal, a small conversation in kindness and openness, and start looking for not just find common ground, but also be interested in what makes us different. I mean, sometimes it's just fun and beautiful to find things out, and you go, wow, that's nothing like the way I do it or the way I live, but it's fascinating nonetheless,
Right. And I think that when we do that, we see that the goal of everybody is to have friends and family and loved ones, and to be able to feed ourselves and those loved ones, and to be able to shelter. And that's really mostly all anybody really wants. I mean, I don't suggest that if you're Muslim to go up to somebody who's yelling racist terms at you and try and give them a hug. I don't suggest that. But I am suggesting, especially to white people who maybe are on the right, unfortunately, I hate to say the right side of things, because there are plenty of people on the right who are not having issues like this and do not agree with what's going on. But if you are like, I don't know, I've just been told that all immigrants are criminals or something. Well, you know what? And you're not really a hateful person. You just need to meet an immigrant, and you need to talk to that person, and you need to ask them, what is it that you went through? What is it that you love about America? And you'll find that the fact that they're willing to risk everything to come to this country, just like, especially if you're white, your ancestors did to come to this country. It's the same. It's just a different time. It's the same.
Yeah.
I always say this. I always compare the Central American migration to Louisiana, particularly. Well, really everywhere between Houston and Mobile, to the Acadians, and that's our people, Oran and me, to that migration. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty similar trajectory.
And you see it everywhere. I mean, I used to, when I was a district attorney in Mobile, I was a district attorney investigator for my internship, and one of my cases was in Bayou La Battery. That's how long I've been out south. That's hard for me to say. And there's a lot of Cajuns in Bayou La Battery, but there's a lot of people from Vietnam in Bayou La Battery as well, and so it's not as isolated as we would like to think. And there are neighbors around you, and they're there. Just that's all you have to do.
Yeah.
That's all you have to do.
Well, I mean, and then you fast forward through time. I mean, sometimes we look at things in such a small little span of time, and a part of that is, again, survival mind keeps you right there in the moment, worrying about just what's next in the future and just what's happened in the past, and you're never really present. But if you give it enough time, I mean, I kind of chuckle about this because you brought that point up, and I go, now we have Cajun festivals and we celebrate Cajun music and Cajun food. It is a celebration, but in that original, patient zero zone, whenever the first Cajuns come here, the first Acadians, that's not what that was. It was we had been exiled, deported to Haiti, and then negotiated a place here, but it was like land that nobody wanted, and everyone was like, y'all stay down there. Yeah. You can't come into New Orleans. Exactly. You need to learn English, but English people don't want to have anything to do with you, so good luck with that. Right. And It's very similar. And here we are,
similar.
all this time later, and now it's a celebration. We celebrate it. We've wrapped our arms around it. We're proud of it.
And, I mean,
and everyone says, "Oh, we did it the right way."
Yeah.
Like, it's not exactly.
None of us
There
did
was
it the
no
right way.
immigration.
Only the
There was
Native
no
Americans did it
INS.
the right way.
There was no USCIS then. There was no INS. There was no we negotiated some land from Spanish Louisiana, but it was. I wouldn't call it the right way.
The biggest group that's coming over at any one time is the group that's that's deep. It's whether it was the Irish or the Italians or at one point they were not considered to be white.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so it just goes on. And I mean, and then if you're going to argue that, then how are you going to deal with the African Americans who were brought here against their will?
Right.
I mean, so. Oh, we can just argue round and round, and it's just so much energy spent on arguing, and it's just so...
Yeah.
And so much of this concept of a border really comes down to this construct of what whiteness is and what it means to be white. I mean, you brought it up earlier yourself, like the migrant man from Mexico who asked you when you were an agent, do you guys hunt Canadians down like this?
Right. Right.
I mean,
no, it's true.
There is a cultural understanding of our northern border that's much different from our cultural understanding of our southern border.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Canadians are our friends.
Yeah.
They just sometimes
they're just
don't
basically
like to pay tax on
us.
their
They're just basically us, but with provincial socialized healthcare.
That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Sometimes they speak French.
Yeah, but so do we sometimes.
Yeah,
that's true. There you go.
It's true. I know it is. This has been fascinating. I mean, I think it was healthy too, the way we talked about everything. I mean, I think it's good to do this and have honest conversations.
And I'm happy, I know it. I'm helped.
I hate to pause the program, but I want to ask you something. Did you know that you can help me and my team at Parker Brand Creative Services grow the Find the Good News signal? For less than a fancy cup of coffee, you can become an Early Risers Club patron on our Patreon page. What's Patreon? Well, it's a way for creators to fund their projects by pooling support from those really passionate people that believe in what they're doing. Do you believe in what we're doing with Find the Good News? I hope you do. We believe that there's already enough negative news in the world, even right here at home, and that good people doing good works deserve a platform to speak from too. That's why we created Find the Good News, and we believe in that simple mission. Maybe you believe in it too. If you do believe in finding and sharing good news, then head over to our Patreon page right now or check out the link in the show description. For a commitment of $3.33 a month, you can join the Early Risers Club of Find the Good News Patreon supporters and get access to the B-Sides, a patrons-only podcast with the crew behind Find the Good News, Parker Brand Creative Services. Each time we level up, the Patreon rewards will get bigger. If you're tired of old news, bad news, and fake news, help support Find the Good News at patreon.com/findthegoodnews. That's patreon.com/findthegoodnews. Now, back to the episode.
I love you just as well.
There's a part of the show that if you listen to Laura's episode, you said actually, right?
You listened to it?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So it's
I can't
called.
believe that.
She did. She listened to it.
It was a long time ago in terms of my life and where I am in life now.
I know, right? A lot's changed,
Yeah.
right? I mean, when you were on the show, I mean, what's
I had
been
a
your
whole different
cycle? It's
career.
been, yeah.
I was working in marketing.
Yeah.
Now I'm a legal assistant. Basically, what happened was I met a lawyer who has a satellite office here, and I was taking friends who were asylum, needed to file for asylum, taking them to meet her, and one day I cornered her into a dinner and drinks meeting and made her give me a job, and so she did. So we just hired another attorney. We're growing. Most of our clients are in detention in Oakdale or in Oberlin in the Allen Parish Safety Complex.
Okay.
And Pine Prairie. We also have some in Wynn and LaSalle, and then Basile is the women's prison. So we have some there.
Nice.
And Jackson.
I see Southwest Louisiana Correctional Center on here. Is that actually being
South
used?
Louisiana.
South Louisiana. Oh, okay.
It's women. So Gina, LaSalle ICE, and Gina and South Louisiana Correction, those were the only two that were open at the beginning of 2019.
I see.
And then everybody, or maybe mid 2018, a couple more were added, and then now we're up to.
It's hard to not look at that and like just it reminds me of like oil wells. I mean, that's what I think of as just dollar signs. It's like, hey, we can plop one here, we can plop one there, we can make some money.
It's about making money because all of these. I mean, look at where we are: Jonesboro, Monroe, St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Office even has beds open. Like, these are all places where the prison or the jail is a huge part of the local economy. Pine Prairie, Allen Parish Public Safety Complex, and Overland. Yes, these are poor communities that don't really have the agriculture that they used to.
Yeah, and
they were already relying on. I mean, Louisiana used to have the most number of prisoners per capita in the nation, and criminal justice reform came along with our most recent gubernatorial election, and that's been touted as a big victory of Governor Edwards, and I appreciate a lot about Governor Edwards, especially looking at what he inherited from the last governor, but he has done nothing to stop or discourage sheriffs and these also the private prisons, the Geo Group and the LaSalle prisons from contracting with ICE and just basically replacing the black bodies that were imprisoned with brown ones.
Yep. Now, do y'all follow Dr. Reverend Barber?
I don't think I know that
I'm
name.
not familiar with him.
Oh my goodness.
We're gonna have to.
My phone's dead, or I would do it right now, Jen.
I don't consider myself a religious woman, but I do consider myself as somebody who tries to practice Jesus' teachings, and just like I try and practice other people's teachings, and I believe in acts and not just saying things. And Reverend Barber, he's taken up the Poor People's Campaign, and what he tries to argue is that, and he does so very gracefully, I might add, is that the same systems that, that brought us slavery and brought us Jim Crow, and you can read this in the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander also, is these are the same systems that are bringing us this private prison industry.
It's
detention and everything. But what gets wrapped up in it, and what people don't understand in these poor white communities, is this is also done intentionally and wraps them up as well.
Right. This is the same as when there were arguments that we couldn't get rid of the plantation agriculture because there would be no economy in the South.
So when you,
this is a direct line from the plantations to the prisons in the South.
Absolutely. If you get a chance to ever see him, he's based out of North Carolina, but he's touring all over the country all the time. And you ever get a chance to see Reverend Barber, Barber, and his followers, and they have a group called Repairers of the Breach.
Oh, wow.
And I went to El Paso with him and spoke before his congregation, and everybody was there, from Muslims to Jewish people, everybody, non-believers, gay, straight, everybody was there. And it was fantastic. And we went down to Juarez, which is very dangerous, but we went down there. I mean, the man is just incredible. And you cannot help but feel whatever you want to call it, the spirit or whatever you want to call it, when you're around this man. And he's definitely somebody to follow. And he wants everybody to belong, and he wants everybody to realize that, and even white people, that this is keeping them down as well. So
we'll have to check him out for sure.
I know. That reminded me of the audiobook I'm listening to is Dr. Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. So it's obviously intended for a white audience, but it's a really good toolbox for like envisioning yourself as a white person as part of the solution, in a way that isn't overstepping, in a way that's respectful, of the experience of those who've been on the receiving end of racism. But you still you see a constructive way to be part of the solution when you're reading or listening to Dr. Kendi's ideas. It's not it doesn't feel so hopeless because I go through periods where I just wonder how we're ever going to course correct when the very foundation of our nation, involved what it involved, chattel slavery.
Well, it's interesting too. I'm just sitting there listening to you talk and some of the things we've talked about, and I've had this thought a few times, and if I can articulate it properly, and the feeling for me when I talk to people about the border is that I feel like the folks I'm talking to most of the time feel like it's a patriotic issue, not a racist issue. And when you start to illustrate all the racial issues that are infused in it, and that it's not about being a patriot at all, it's actually infused with these core racist markers, then the conversation gets really strange, because it turns into, it makes me realize I guess people want to be patriots, right? It's like we want to believe we're patriots and somehow wrap the flag all around this, and paint it red, white, and blue, and it's not. It's not about being a patriot at all.
There's so much discourse that gets classified as patriotic that is racist. It's already infused into
but don't you think that
what we think of as patriotic at times? I don't think it has to be that way.
No. And I think this argument of what it means to be like a Christian, or what it means to be a patriot, what it means to be an American, is all the stuff that we're given is all too easy. I mean, because it's like, I was talking with a police officer in Louisville, Kentucky recently, where I was speaking, and which is a wonderful city. I absolutely loved it. And he listened to my speech. He said, and I was waiting because he asked to talk to, he went and saw me speak, and then he came afterwards, and he was in uniform, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. And I'm like, oh gosh, here we go. He's going to say how I'm anti-law enforcement and I don't, this and that. But he was like, it was so refreshing to hear you talk. And people just need to understand that, saying thank you for your service doesn't make you patriotic. Wearing a red, white and blue T-shirt does not make you patriotic. Telling the police that you're never going to question anything you do does not make you patriotic, And so being a patriot also, like being a Christian, like being an adult, like anything, requires a lot of accountability and responsibility. You can't just be something without all that,
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things I've heard, and maybe I've even said to folks, is like, one man's patriot is another man's terrorist, and depending on which side of it you're on.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's when you really put yourself in another human being's shoes. Sometimes you go, man, I actually relate with what their plight is, and then when their plight doesn't align with your colors, then you start to question that. I've found myself in that kind of predicament many times, where I say the words, look, I love this country, but very often the things I say probably won't sound like it, but they actually come from a place of love, because I think we can be better than we are, and even better than we've been.
Yeah, and I mean, like the right-wing radio host guy I was talking to in Clint, Texas, he said, he was talking about patriotism, and I said, well, do you think that these left-wing liberals that are out here yelling about the kids being held in detention, do you think what they're doing is anti-patriotic, that it's un-American? And he paused, and I knew he wanted to say yes. And he goes, and then I interrupted him, and I said, because dissent is patriotic.
Right.
And he said, you're right. I agree that they have the right to do what they want. And I said, and you have the right to disagree with it. That's fine. But we don't have to throw things at each other and yell and scream. But to be a patriot, it's more than just saying, okay, do whatever you want. I mean, and that's the whole thing about America, was you always have to question the government. I don't care who's in charge. It's patriotic to question the government and ask why things are done. And when we look at the Border Patrol in general, the Border Patrol is just, I don't know that it ever had a way, because the Border Patrol was literally born out of racism. It was brought to be because of the Chinese immigrants that were here that we wanted to get rid of in 1924. But certainly after 9/11, they really, really just went off the tracks with these anti-immigrant hate groups. That when you look at who started these anti-immigrant hate groups, they're all actually these old school eugenicists, which is that's just a scientific way to be racist. It's population control and that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I mean, when you look at who's behind it, but at the same time. And I understand I'm not a Latina, so it's not as personal. And when somebody who's Latino and they have personal contact with this and it's painful, you have to let them have their pain. You have to listen to their pain, and at the same time, you have to understand. It's so hard to do. You have to understand that many of these agents do not understand how they've been manipulated and do not understand what they're. That this was planned and they've been tricked. And not to say that a lot of the agents aren't outright racist. Some are. A lot are. But, and I don't think you can be part of that organization like I couldn't be without tending to that way. But I don't think it's this either or. You're either a racist or you're not, you know?
Right, no. Do you hear the criticism, well, most of the Border Patrol agents have Spanish last names. Most of them, their parents and grandparents came the right way, and they're Latino immigrants themselves.
I hear that all the time.
So what what is your answer? Because I'm sure there's like a culturally complicated answer that, here in Louisiana we have a small little Border Patrol office in Lake Charles that's not,
Jen,
they're not,
so there's
a customs. Anyway, yeah,
that makes sense. Only in your port, I would imagine.
Right. We have a little customs office in the port.
So generally, what people have to understand, and like half my class was Latino, and I remember when I was in class and the law instructor was like, "You'll just know when they're here." They use the term illegally.
Right.
And I said, "What do you mean you'll just know?" And he said, "You just know." And I said, I don't understand. And the guys are laughing at me, and I turn and I look around and I go, how do I know that he's not here illegally?
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And they get all offended. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. I'm a white girl from Alabama. I don't know.
Yeah. What's the marker? Yeah.
And so the deal with the Latino agents is that not every Latino obviously is connected to their heritage. That's one.
Right.
And then a lot of them come from border communities.
Right.
So the Border Patrol heavily recruits down here in the border communities, especially in the really, really small towns.
Yeah.
And what you find is that the agents will tell you, yeah, I remember growing up, every time I went to school, agents would stop me and ask my citizenship, and they were jerks, and I hated them, and blah, blah, blah. But what I knew was that as a young Latino growing up in a podunk town on the border with no opportunities, that
this was a good job.
Paid pretty good, yep. And they had health insurance, and the agents, the one thing I can say, even though they messed with me as a kid, nobody messed with them. And they always had a nice house, they had the nice car, they had the girlfriends.
You just described gang culture.
It is.
That's literally what that sounds like.
Well, these are the same people who are deciding to staff the ICE prisons in Louisiana because it's a good job.
Oh, man.
It's psychologically the same thing. And so, but then there's on Twitter, and I can't remember, she told me what her real name is, but I can't remember because she's a writer, a young black writer, and her Twitter handle is at Caffeinated Living. So if you decide to
follow her,
please let her.
I think I do.
Her from me, but she broke it down into a very succinct argument that especially many youngsters understand, is that when you see somebody like a Ben Carson in in an administration that doesn't seem to care for black people, when you see agents, Latino agents in the Border Patrol that doesn't seem to care about Hispanics or other Latinos, what those people are doing is they're seeking privilege. They're not seeking equality.
Right.
Okay.
It's like you say that to people, they go, oh, because we all at some point maybe have done that.
Yeah.
And I think that rings true.
Yeah, that does. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but that's definitely accurate. You can see that.
So I don't think it's as much a characteristic of the Border Patrol that half of them are Latino. It's more a characteristic of their personality.
I see.
Okay.
I mean, you can look back through, I mean, I guess even like certain, like even wartime, where you see some similar things like that, right? Where you'll see like a particular, I don't even really the right way to say that, but like in a conflict, you'll see people from maybe the other side come over to the aggressor's side and sort of form their own little unit within that apparatus, I guess, you know, and then it becomes like, hey, I'm on the winning side now. Right. I'm on the right side, and it's a clout thing. It makes you feel accepted and like, yeah, I know I'm not one of you, but because I'm wearing your uniform, you accept me since I'm on your side. It's not real acceptance, if that makes any sense. I mean, it's just, you know, you're wearing the colors, you're wrapped in it. Now, you do hear that kind of language with like some military groups, you know, like Marines. I know my father used to say that, you know, you didn't see color in the Marine Corps is what he would always say. He said, Marines are Marines. They're not, you know, that's the thinking anyway that he would put out there, you know. And I wonder if the Border Patrol, does it have an element like that? It's like, you know, it doesn't sound like it. With women,
they have that idea that they're all green and they all bleed green is what they say. But but when you get into it as an actual agent, there are all these different cliques where the Latino agents feel that they're not getting promoted enough, and only the white
that's
agents
what I wondered. Yeah.
So there are all these cliques, just as there is in the military, and so it just depends on how the leadership wants to use it to their advantage.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think my big takeaway from everything we talked about is that it may be a slow change, but I think for me, the change happens just like what you described, is by one, having conversations with people and not coming in hot. You know, I mean, I do believe standing up for people who are downtrodden. Sometimes you do have to go stand on a line and put your skin in the game, you know, and sweat and bleed. Sometimes you do. But I think it's worth the effort to have dialogue first and really truly try to bring somebody in through, and that takes a lot of energy and effort. It can be exhausting too. But I think it's worth the effort to do that first and continue to have those types of conversations, especially with people that I don't agree with. That's something that I am guilty of, is being exhausted by a negative interaction and just going, just forget it, I'm not going to talk about this anymore, and then sort of clustering up with like-minded folks. And I have to resist that, because if I continually have conversations with like-minded people, I'm not really getting in front of the people that really need to change the most, you know?
I think it's human nature and it's animal nature. You know, you go to where your comfort is, and if it's easier that way, then that's where you're going to go. It's why we have stereotypes. I mean, if you realize that we are basically animals, a stereotype that says that lions are dangerous, they will eat you, well, that kind of benefits you. And so I think that we still have, in some ways, some of those especially when we start seeing our basic needs not being met, whether we're talking about food and shelter and safety, then you start seeing a lot of this hate and lashing out and stuff. And then just, I do agree, obviously, that we have never dealt with our racism and what we have done as a country. We've just tried to gloss over it. Yeah, certainly growing up as a girl in Alabama, the only education I had regarding slavery was like, yeah, we had slaves.
Right.
And then they were free.
Well, sure.
You know,
so.
I talked about this online the other day. I mean, this is maybe a silly thing to throw in here, but, you know, just what we're not taught when we're young, or what we've tried to cover up in these terrible atrocities. I was watching HBO's new Watchmen series. And so I was watching the first episode, and that show, if you know anything about it, or the comic books, it's sort of like alternative American history, where they've tweaked, in the books, they tweak America's history just a little bit to create this really different timeline that we had maybe followed. And so when the show came out, this new show, they opened up with this event in 1921 Tulsa, Oklahoma. I didn't know about this, and so I'm watching this, the Black Wall Street Massacre, and I'm watching them do this Black Wall Street Massacre, and I looked over at my wife, and I said, oh, this is like the books. They're doing these little alternative American American facts. And in my mind, this was just something they crafted for the show to set the stage.
Yeah, this happened.
So I go online the next morning kind of digging around, and I was like, what in the world? This is real. This is a real thing. And I was like, how does this not get transmitted to you as an American citizen that this is a part of your history?
I mean,
this bad
make no
thing.
mistake, that is by design.
It is by design, and it bothers me, and you know, it bothers me as a 45-year-old man that I guess we only get sort of taught the good parts, and we sort of gloss over the blood. You know, I mean, we're sort of drenched in blood in a lot of ways, and we don't get taught that stuff.
And it's that way on the border too. I mean, it's not like they taught us that in the Border Patrol, how the Border Patrol came about. And then when you read the history of enforcement on the border, and you see like in the 30s and 40s when people would come across to work in the fields and then go back, that there was also a lot of lynchings going on of Mexican people.
Yes.
So. And then just a lot of killings and murders. And then I think there was a time, and I don't know the exact dates, but there was a time when there was like, I don't know, a measles outbreak or some sort of outbreak. And then, of course, they blamed it on the field workers. And so then they made them all shave their heads before they could come in to work in the fields. And they made them strip down naked and doused them with chemicals and all this other stuff. And I mean, just reminiscent, it makes me think of reminiscent of the concentration, how people were treated in the concentration camps in Germany. And, and then obviously the lynching that happened on the southern border that was also part of slavery. So, and the common denominator in all that, I think, it's like white supremacy. They just cannot stop. They're always looking for a little way in, and it just is like. And I know, I had some young Hispanic man in Kentucky came up to me and he said, "How do I talk to my white loved ones without them thinking I'm saying that they're racist?" And I said, yeah, white people get really like
fragile about that.
Yeah. Right, it's true.
It's like, well, I'm not a racist.
Yeah,
yeah. And I said, so you're gonna have that, and if you love that person, and you shouldn't have to, but you're just gonna have to be gentle about that, and just like you want them to be gentle about how you feel about being, how your culture has been treated. And it's hard because I can hear Latino friends right now saying, well, I don't have anything to be gentle about. And it's true. But I just ask that we all try to be kind and quiet with each other and walk in each other's shoes and listen to each other before we speak and before, we lash out. And that young man it was just heartbreaking. He was sobbing uncontrollably afterwards and hugged me like 3 times and was just like, I've never heard a white woman talk like that. And, and I wasn't all like, white people are terrible.
Right. And it doesn't sound like you're saying that, right?
It's I'm not going to lie to you. They're going to think you're calling them a racist. It's not going to be fun.
Yeah, that's
but
always.
If you love them, you want them in your life, and you feel that you need to broach this conversation to continue a relationship, then you need to find a way. And you need to let them know that whatever it is that they're doing is hurting you and why it's hurting you. Maybe they're making jokes and they just, like run for the border or something. And you need to explain why that's offensive. And hopefully they love you enough to see that. But try and come in. If it starts to devolve into anger and shouting, to back away from it. And, so. Yeah. It's complicated, but I think it's worth it. I think that this is what we're meant to do. So, and the joy that I get from it in going into those dark places and coming out a little bit with a little bit more understanding and a little bit of forgiveness and is worth everything. It truly is.
It sounds like it's world healing work is what it sounds like. It really does. I mean, it sounds like sometimes, you hear people say, they go, that's God's work. Yeah, it sounds like that to me. Like it really does. When you frame it that way, the way you just said that, it's something that must be done because it is just.
Right.
And I think, when
That's
we
what we're meant
talk
to do.
about patriotism, what we were talking about before, you look at it feels like to a lot of people who believe that just wearing the hat and, draping the flag around them, that's patriotism. And when you say, well, what about slavery? They take it as such an insult. And it's like, no, it's not an insult. We're trying to say that, yeah, we have these ideals. We have ideals to be fair and all men are created equal. And this is what we espouse. And you know what? We've espoused it, but we've not really
lived
gotten
up to it. Yeah.
So let's, instead of trying to just cover up the stinking pile of poo, it's still stinky, and I would like to deal with a pile of poo instead of
actually flush it.
Actually flush it, and let's deal with it. Not everybody obviously is going to come to that same understanding, but I think the majority of people, I think the majority of Americans, the majority of people in the world are neither all the way left, all the way right. I think all of us are somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I find that within myself, if I'm honest. I mean, the other day, someone used the term liberal in speaking about me, and I was actually, I don't use that word about myself. I don't think of myself in those terms, you know what I mean? And so, but I felt a little bit, I'm not going to lie, like I honestly, I kind of felt a little like a gut punch. I was like, what? Like I was actually surprised as I went, liberal. And then I started like kind of analyzing very quickly, like, so what does that mean from this person's perspective? Like, where am I at on this spectrum? Because I find I do have thoughts that are feelings about certain things that would probably fall in a conservative camp. Other things maybe are a little more liberal, and some things I'm not so sure. But then I started thinking, I said, but they're only framing me as a liberal through a certain set of markers. Just these things, and these are the things that they care about. And, I realized in that conversation that I have different markers for me. And I realized most of the conversations I'm having are like that. They're based, like, for instance, like our president, their support of that person is based on a set of, let's say, 5 markers. But when I look at my lack of support, I have 5 markers that don't have any, they don't look like theirs at all. And so we're just basing our support or lack thereof on completely different things that matter to us, because the things that matter to them just do not matter to me. I'm like, I'm not in this, these aren't my switches.
I don't even think Trump is a Republican. I don't even think he's a conservative.
No, I actually
he's just
don't
an authoritarian kleptocrat.
He's authoritarian. He's an egomaniacal, whatever narcissist, and he will be on whatever side is benefiting him at any time. But he has taken up the moniker and the label of the Republican Party, and unfortunately, the Republican Party has not fought back enough on that. So that would be kind of cool if we could see them try and take their party back. But
well, they tried before that election and it didn't work out for them very well, and now they're falling in line.
Yeah, it is interesting how a figure like that can do that. Like you said, it's wrapping yourself in a brand. I mean, it's just branding, branding. And calling yourself something, and then the party kind of doesn't really have a choice. I mean, they do have a choice, but they kind of go, well, if we want to keep our status quo, we kind of have to go along with this. And it's just bullying. It's just bullying.
He's very good at
it's very strange.
exploiting loopholes in whether it's the government or the system. He's very good at that. Like so many things that he's violated and done are not necessarily illegal. They're just contrary to our norms. And that's kind of
Yeah. And I don't know. I've searched my thoughts on this all the time, because it is funny when he said, and to me, because the late night comedians poke fun at what he says every night, because every day there's some ridiculous thing. Like I think yesterday,
he's not so good with a speech.
So yesterday I think it was we're going to build the wall between New Mexico and Colorado, and I go, that's ridiculous. And in my mind, I go, any American knows that's. And I even give him the benefit of the doubt and go, even he knows this. He knows this. And I've come to believe that it's just like a static screen. It's like, how much bullshit can I just throw out there and just say whatever haphazardly and just create so many wrecks that you just can't even focus on one thing and see what's going on anymore. And I just get my way kind of dancing between the raindrops of all of this crap that I'm slinging out there. And I just don't know that I'm 100% buying that that isn't intentional, or at least some part of why it's like that. It's just like, I'm just going to feed stuff that's volatile, triggering people constantly, and the narcissistic element just feeds on that.
You know what he reminds me of? And I recognized him right away. And if you've ever had to deal with a con man, then you recognize it too. Is he reminds me of, in a lot of ways, of my alcoholic mother. All the manipulation and the lying and everything is centered around them. So I think a lot of people, if you grew up with an alcoholic parent, there's books written on the norms of alcoholic families and how everybody has to keep the secret and everybody has to prop the alcoholic up and keep things going. And he reminds me of exactly that. And alcoholics, a lot of times, they're not necessarily narcissistic, but they can have narcissistic traits in our view. And I think that people who've dealt with con men and stuff, they knew exactly what he was from the get-go. But they're really good at manipulating people and having people think that there's something else, and people want to believe it. It's comfortable to believe it, I think, a lot of times.
I never thought of it that way, but that's true. I mean, it's like don't talk about it, don't upset that person, and so you just sort of like a family secret that everybody already knows, but you just don't. It's a weird thing.
Walking on eggshells.
Yeah, walking on eggshells, and it's
and that's how he is as a president. I mean, he really is. That's how it feels in this entire country, like we're all walking on eggshells.
Yeah, well, no, it's true. I feel it as like an anxiety, a background noise.
And I'm happy, I know it.
This episode's Fishing for Goodies Fishbowl sponsor is Brimstone Museum and Henning Cultural Center in Sulphur, Louisiana. I don't know what you look for when you travel, but one of the things I look for when I'm putting together my itinerary is a unique museum or gallery in the city I'm traveling to. I do this almost every time I go to a new city, but if I'm being honest, I'm guilty of not always doing that very thing right here at home in Sulphur, Louisiana. That's really a shame, because we have one of the most interesting, historically relevant, and culturally rich corners in any city in the country about 2 minutes from where I'm sitting right now. I'm talking about the Brimstone Museum and Henning Cultural Center. Have you ever really thought about why our city is named Sulphur? They've got a permanent exhibit on the history of the sulfur industry that answers that simple question and more. You really get a full scope of just how important the sulfur mining industry was to the development of Southwest Louisiana and the impact it had on the rest of the world. Yes, the rest of the world. On the same property, right next door to the museum, is the Henning Cultural Center, presenting some of the most interesting, modern, and culturally relevant local art shows I've ever seen. My dear friend Tom Trahan and the Brimstone Historical Society have really worked hard to give us this treasure, and it's a multifaceted jewel that I plan to take advantage of more often. You don't have to wonder what their hours are, or how to get there, or what shows are coming up. Just go to brimstonemuseum.org like I did, and subscribe to their mailing list right there on the homepage. That's brimstonemuseum.org. Tom will make sure you start getting the announcements for each and every new show at the gallery. But you don't have to wait for the mail to arrive to enjoy this historical local treasure. You don't have to be guilty, like me, of overlooking a local wonder that conveniently sits next to the Grove, one of the most beautiful walking parks in Southwest Louisiana. Drop in and say hi to Tom for me. Tour the museum and center, and make sure to tell Tom that you heard about Brimstone Museum on Find the Good News. Now, let's take that dive in the fishbowl. So I'm going to move us into the fishbowl section of our show, which I think I talked to you about a little bit through our chat. And this is the part of the show called Fishing for Goodies, where we give the interview up to the fishbowl.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do, since you're not actually here with us, I'm just going to draw the questions out and then read them, and then we'll just discuss them. I don't rarely get to dig my hand in here. Usually the guest does, so this is kind of always fun. I always try to go
I have to come to Louisiana. I love Louisiana food. So.
Oh, we love it here. We got great food here. That's one of the big draws.
I miss it.
Do you? Do you get to travel here? Have you been here many times, or?
I haven't, but I miss, being in Mobile and stuff, and so I learned all about Louisiana food, and I love Louisiana food, and I cook Louisiana food every chance I get. I use Tony.
Tony Chachere's. Yeah.
I love it.
That's a Louisiana staple, man. Everywhere you go, somebody's using that. I'm amazed at the reach of that brand.
It's out here, but everybody out here, of course, calls it Chachere's.
Chachere's. My sister had a boyfriend when we were kids, and he was from Seattle. And I think he was from Seattle. Anyway, he came down here, and he goes, "Oh, y'all have the Tony's Chachere's." And he said that, and I was like, well, what's he talking about? And I realized it was Tony Chachere's. Yeah. Well, that's a hard one to say, though. I think they even have a TV commercial where it's like a little joke, where it's like showing people trying to say it from different places. Yeah. Well, this is interesting, and nobody's asked this question before. So the first question from the Fishbowl says, which words or phrases do you most overuse? Does Jenn Budd have any catchphrases?
Well, my wife would say that I talk Southern sometimes because I say, you want, I should.
You want, I should?
But I don't have a heavy Southern accent unless I get around people like y'all. But I do say y'all a lot. But I think, I'll say like a lot, and I'll say so a lot before I start talking and stuff. Yeah. But
have you ever had anything that you said in an interview? Because you've been interviewed quite a bit in the recent years. Has there ever been anything taken out of context where you were like, oh my gosh, that is not my point that I was trying to make, or they've just selected something?
No, not really. Everybody's been pretty fair. Good. I haven't really had, anything. I did put out a tweet this morning that some people got upset about, but
what did it say? Can you tell us?
I was commenting on how Zuckerberg appears to me to be robotic. And a lot of people said that he apparently is on the autism spectrum, and I had no idea. And I don't have any connection with autism or any knowledge of autism. So at first there were a lot of jokes going around, and then people said that he's on the spectrum, or they think he's on the spectrum. And I said, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean any offense, but it's already out there. So I apologized for that. But,
well, can I tell you something really strange about Facebook since you brought it up? I've never had this happen before. And I always see people go, oh, I've been blocked on Facebook. I can't post anything, or I can't share anything. And that's never happened to me. And I always look at these people and I go, well, I go look at what they post, and I'm like, it's kind of toeing the line of something maybe offensive or racist or just kind of bigoted. And I go, well, I guess I can see where it broke some rules. But yesterday, I was blocked.
You got put in Facebook jail?
Facebook jail. And I was like, this. And first I thought something's wrong with my phone. And so I uninstalled it, reinstalled it. I'm doing all the normal stuff. And then I started noticing the same thing on all my computers. And I was like, this is very odd. And so I started analyzing my habits. Have I done something? What have I posted? Couldn't find a doggone thing that was any different than anything I did.
Notification about what put you in Facebook?
No, I did reply and send them a message saying, hey, look, if you review my activity, nothing's changed. But I couldn't help but have this sinking suspicion, like the only thing that has changed was that I was talking to new people through the Messenger app that I hadn't talked to before. And so I was like, well, is that like a marker for Facebook now? Do they put people in these little timeout zones whenever, there's something that like that happening?
I don't know. I know that sometimes, like Southern Borders Twitter, they sometimes get put in timeout, and it's because people who don't agree with their pro-immigrant stance will find something and report. And so, I mean, you always run that risk, I guess.
That's possible.
Somebody could say,
but if someone reports your content on Facebook, you get a notification.
Oh, well, I did click whatever the thing was that you click, and I filled out the little thing and showed them, and I just gave them my report on, my activity and, why I think I shouldn't be blocked. Basically, it was like my little sales pitch, and then within 30 minutes, it was back.
Wow.
It was very strange. I've never went through that before, though, so I didn't know what it even looked like. Have you ever been through that? You ever been put in Facebook jail?
No, not yet. But, I mean, I would imagine at some point if I was louder, maybe it would. People ask me all the time, do you ever get, like, Border Patrol attacking you and stuff? And I I get mostly people, the big thing, of course, is they comment on my weight because I'm overweight and say I could never have been an agent. And it's like, okay, that was like 20 years ago. You know?
Right, yeah, all of us 20 years ago.
right.
I'm 48 now, so, you know, and it's like, and I left the patrol in 2001, so.
Yeah.
So they just try and be mean and hateful. I have had one agent's wife tell me I needed to shut my mouth or they'd shut it for me.
Really? So an actual, like, kind of threat.
Yeah. And then another guy had written to me and told me that because he could tell I was gay, that I was the one that probably raped migrants and stuff. And
wow.
so people are very hateful sometimes, but for the most part, the agents and stuff just kind of leave me alone. I've not had any issues. That might change at some point. But. Yeah.
Well, and sometimes people will leave you alone if what you're saying is actually true and can be proven. They're like, you know what, it's better we just don't kind of let that do its thing, because if we draw attention to ourselves, it's just going to make it even more of a place to look, right? If you back up the behavior, right? I mean,
right. If you share this person's tweet, or even if you're arguing against them, you're still sharing their tweet. You're still sharing their stuff. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, let's go to question number 2. That was pretty good. I like how they end up in places that the question doesn't ask. Let's see what we got here. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. What is your motto?
I do have a motto, now that you asked me that.
Okay, good.
I'm drawing a blank now that you asked me that. Do you have a motto?
Do I have a motto? You know, I think I do, but I think I got it from a movie. It's be nice until it's time not to be nice. Patrick Swayze from Roadhouse.
Hell yeah.
Oh, there you go.
You know, and I'll lean more on the nice side. I think I try to be nice on the front end of everything. Even if it's just a smile, and sometimes even if I don't want to, I mean, and even sometimes to my detriment, I will try my best to be kind and nice. But I do feel like there's a threshold where it's like I was saying, sometimes you have to go stand on that line and put your blood and sweat in it. And so I feel like I try to gauge when that time is, but I don't greet everything with a ball of fist.
I know what my motto is.
Oh, good.
It's and I do always say it. And actually, it's funny that I forgot it because I just tweeted about it. Is that you have to meet people where they are.
Ooh, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, this guy who's kind of my mentor at Southern Borders, and I gave him my badge and my gun belt and everything, and handed it over to him for thanks and stuff. But you have to meet people where they are, and not all people are able to get to where you would hope they would be. But that's okay. So you meet people where they are.
I like that. Mm-hmm. What about you, Laura?
Lâche pas la patate.
What's that?
Don't drop the potato.
Don't drop the potato?
Don't give up.
What does that
and
mean?
Then
Don't
in
give
Spanish, it would be no te rindas. Don't give up.
Don't give up. I like that too.
There you go.
Yeah, I'd say there's a few mottos that have been sticky for me, and a lot of them do come from pop culture, but I have this poster in my office from this old 80s show called Megaforce, and their patch, it's actually on my backpack, it says deeds not words, and I always loved that. It was like, hey, that's simple, deeds not words.
Yep.
Since we're talking about mottos, I did not stage that, but I do have another question that I wrote down, and it has to do with mottos, and it was the Border Patrol's motto, which was honor first.
Right.
What?
Yeah, I wrote that down because I didn't know that either, and I wondered when I wrote this down. I thought, I wonder what Jen thinks
I'm
of
always
that.
like, when I write, I'm like, is this honor first? I don't think so.
Yeah. So did you know that motto going into the Border Patrol, or did you learn it after you became an agent? And then,
well, I learned it.
Probably the first day of training. Yeah.
What's the sales pitch behind that motto? I mean, like, hey, honor first. Is it like Semper Fidelis is for the Marines? Like,
yeah, that's how they see themselves, is that they're honorable and stuff. But my point to them is, it's not honorable to put children in cages. It's not honorable to put asylum seekers in indefinite detention, and they know this. And it's not honorable to cover up their rape culture and stuff like that. I wish they did put honor first. I really do. But they don't, and that's my push, is I want them to put honor first, like they say.
I love that. If it's going to be your motto, try to do it.
Yeah.
Give it a really an honest attempt, an honorable attempt at honor first. Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that question. Let's see what else is in here.
Can I read it?
Yeah. All right, here we go.
All right, Jen. What is the nicest thing a stranger has ever done for you?
The nicest thing that a stranger has ever done for me is, I mean, the easy out would say like somebody bought me a free meal after I spoke one time and I didn't know who it was, but that was kind of...
Can I reframe that a little bit, that question, and bring it more home? Has in your job when you were with the Border Patrol, did a migrant ever do anything nice to you, nice for you? Someone that maybe you assisted or helped?
They're not always in a position, I would say, to do that, but just the fact that they would tell me a lot of times that I was a really good person.
Yeah.
I remember one time I caught this a large group down in Tecate, but up on the mountain, and I was on the side of a cliff, and a helicopter was flying out there, and it was just causing all this brush, and it was a large group, and I was by myself, which is usually how we patrol, but I had learned in the academy any decent-sized man could kick my butt, so I always tried to be very careful, especially in the dark and stuff, and I was grabbing this one guy to come out, and he was not listening to me. He was younger, and he was being rude, and this older gentleman stood up, and he was like probably in his 60s, and he said, "You need to do what she says and be polite." And he helped me in this situation, being on the side of the cliff, because I could have easily gone over the cliff. And it was about probably a group of 30 or 40, and the young man said something to me in Spanish, and I think he probably said something rude. I couldn't understand what he had said, and the old man just dressed him down and was, she is a polite person, she's being nice, she's, because you have to understand that their experience with law enforcement is much different than ours. And he's like, she's not beating us, she's not yelling at us or cursing. And the young man apologized and stuff. And so, I mean, it could have been a very dangerous situation, and I had no reason to be rude to them or no cause to do that. And he was just being a little punk kid, but this older gentleman just helped me, and I needed that. So
I love what you just said right there. I don't know, I just respect that so much. You were in a position of authority, but what you just said was, I had no reason to be aggressive or to be rude. And I don't always experience that with law enforcement, but when I do experience it, I always appreciate it, because they are in a position of authority and power. And I wish I could say that I haven't been on the other end of that, where that power has maybe been abused a little bit, and it left it leaves a sting on you. It leaves like this stain to where the next time you encounter someone in uniform, where you just assume they're going to abuse that power. And what you said, if that's 100% true, that's amazing. It's awesome, because that's what I always hope for, is exactly what you said, is go, hey, I do have authority and I do have power, but I'm coming at you with my hands open. I'm coming at you with kindness and with respect. It's not just aggression.
When I first started in being the only female at Campo, and it's a very well-known station in the Border Patrol, because it's very rigorous and physically demanding, and I would follow what some of my instructors or my training agents did, and they would come up and they would, sit down, shut up, let me run, and just yell and this and that and intimidate. And I found that because we always patrolled alone, I found that, and we hiked alone, I found that being as small as I was, and they used to call me little white girl in Spanish was what they called me, because I was so thin back then, and but they what I found is that I had less confrontation and less problems when I came up and said, "Is everybody okay? Does anybody need water? Is anybody hurt?" And that's the first thing out of my mouth. And it puts them off guard. Whereas they're expecting you to be confrontational, they're expecting to run, they're expecting to have problems. But when you do something like that, they're like, oh no, I'm good, I'm okay. And, so for the most part, that's actually how if I had to, then I had to, but,
Yeah. It's that first do no harm mentality. That's actually really
Right.
beautiful. I like that.
Right.
You said this a few times today since we've been talking, and I guess I'm trying to, my imagination kicks in every time you say it. I'm trying to put myself in these situations you're in, and I didn't realize that you guys patrolled alone. Yeah, that surprises
Sometimes on the
me.
highways, you might see two people on a highway, but no, you patrol alone. So when I was young, trying to prove myself, the agents would go hiking in a, like 110-degree weather after a group on a really long mountain trail and up these mountains and boulders, and eventually they give up, and I'd always go in behind them and gut it out and prove that I could do what they didn't do.
Yeah.
And but no, you're all alone. So
Well, I have a question, and this is maybe I don't know, off in left field, but was there anything in that time? I mean, I know you've painted an honest picture. I have a lot to think about too, and I hope the people listening search their hearts and their minds and their opinions and their perspectives after listening to everything we talked about. But during that time, did you ever experience anything that you would consider beautiful?
Anytime that I could help somebody, and that it does include those who had succumbed to the environment out there, because it snows in Campo and it gets really hot in Campo too, so we see both sides. But anytime you could do that, it was very touching. I remember I helped one young 12-year-old girl who had ended up getting lost out there, and she was out there for 3 days, but she was smart enough she could hear the highway, and she kept going towards the highway, and along the way she would find bottles of water that groups before her had left, and somehow she survived. And that felt good. Or any time where somebody had an accident or something and you could help save their lives, or you tracked them through the snow and got to them right before they passed from hypothermia and things like that. So there are opportunities. Some people have said you just hate the Border Patrol, like I said, I think in the beginning of this podcast, but it's like, no, I don't. And it's very confusing at times for me, because I do have moments where I was very proud to have that uniform on.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of moments where obviously I didn't. But it's very emotional. It's not just they suck, I hate them, and they're terrible. It's none of that. It's none of that. Even though I had a really abusive and rough time there, it's not like that at all.
Yeah. No, that's why I wanted to ask you that, because I know sometimes within these time frames in our life, whether it's 4 years, 5 years, a decade, you can look in there and go, oh, this was the worst decade of my life, or that 5 years was terrible. Or like me, I'm divorced. And so I can get caught if I really sit and think about, oh, there's so much, this was bad and that was bad and this was bad. That is honestly not the truth. It's only a part of the truth, because within those things, there were still moments of joy and happiness and laughter and love and light. And so it's easy in retrospect to just go paint it with one brush. And so I try not to fall into that frame of mind. That's why I wanted to ask you that, because I know there had to be moments of that, just like what you described, human compassion. And
There's actually one really good story that I have that kind of encompasses all that emotion into one night. So I was a senior agent already, and I had gotten back from prosecution's detail like 6 months down at Sector, and I'd come back to Campo, and it was my first night out, and they put me in Tecate, and I was up on one of the mountains looking down into Mexico and all the Tecate beer sign, and I was just waiting for sensors to go off and stuff to happen, and a sensor went off, and the scope truck said, okay, I got one person walking north in the gully. And I said, all right. So I jump in my truck, whisk down the mountain, and go there, and I'm just walking through the gully, and he's like, okay, he's right to your left. And I'm like, okay. And I flash my light to the left, and there's this Mexican adult male, and he looks kind of like he's wearing a suit that doesn't fit him and stuff, which is odd. So he's not like the normal crosser and stuff. And he's kind of crouched down, and then all of a sudden he goes to jump up, and I go, like that, and he goes back down. And then I pulled my cuffs out, and I said, because believe it or not, we didn't normally cuff a lot of people back then. Most of the migrants are very nice, and the last thing they want to do is tussle with a Border Patrol agent. So, but I cuffed him, plus I'm right close to the fence and everything, so I cuffed him, and I'm walking with him, and I've got, my hands on his arm, and I'm walking with him back to my truck, and he starts jumping at me from the side, kind of like, like he's trying to bite my neck or something like that.
Wow, okay.
And all of a sudden I hear over my radio, in my earpiece, I hear, I don't remember what the 10 code was for an agent getting, beat up or something like that, but something like that. And then he's like, he's trying to hurt Bud. He's yelling my last name. And all of a sudden this truck from another agent comes out of nowhere, and this agent comes running through and flies through the air, and before I can even say anything, and I'm like, stop, and he's on top of this guy, and it's just like punching the hell out of him in his face and stuff, and I'm like, stop. And I finally get the agent off of him and stuff, and he's like, what, he was beating you up and stuff, and he didn't hurt the guy too bad, so it wasn't that big of a deal. But I said, and the guy's laughing actually, and I said, he's not hurting me, he's trying to kiss me. And he was had a little mental issues, and we encounter that actually a lot out there in the middle of nowhere. People don't think about that. And so he had decided that he was attracted to me, and so he kept calling me, instead of Agent Bud, he would call me Agente Bud, and he would say Agente Bud, ella es mi novia, she's my girlfriend.
Oh my gosh.
And he was telling the other agents this, and then the guy's like, is she okay, over the radio, the scope's, and I'm like, I'm fine, it's all okay. And then the other guy's like, he thinks he's, and I'm like, stop saying this over the radio, And so I ended up putting him in his truck, and it's just kind of, I remember I got in my truck, and I'm going back to the port to, I don't know, go to the restroom or go get lunch or something, and I'm driving right along the fence, right back to the port, and I'm just like laughing to myself, and I go, gosh, every time I feel like I hate these people, I find out how much I love them, and I'm just laughing, and it was just so funny, and it was, and luckily he wasn't hurt, and he laughed it off, and this and that, and it was just a good story. And then, I'm not kidding you, within that second, something hits my truck, the hood of my truck. Somebody on the other side of the fence threw a human head.
What?
And it landed on my truck.
A human head.
A head?
Yeah, and it had a little bit of hair and skin still attached to it.
Like a migrant who had died?
What?
No, it's probably a cartel kill or something like that.
My
so,
damn.
God.
And I'm like, and I stop on the brakes, and I go, God damn it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I hate these and I'm just like, I'm so mad, and I was just like, and they ran out and got the head apparently, so I couldn't do anything about it and report it or anything. But it's like, before I knew it, they were gone. But it's just like in the span of a few minutes, I'm like,
all this,
all these
the border, and I forgot
experiences.
how great the people are out here. And then the next minute, I'm cursing and screaming and yelling.
God, isn't that life though, right? I mean, like, that's a good old. I'm glad you told that story, because it's like, you can have this elation and this laugh and this joy or fun, and then all of a sudden, next thing you know, there's a human head,
severed human head,
coming at you, landing on your truck.
Like that extreme in most people's lives. But
Maybe not. Maybe not.
It's how the border was.
Man, that is a wild story.
How the border was.
Yeah, I mean, you just nailed it. I mean, like I said, you don't think about mental illness. We talk about mental illness and mental health a lot on this show. And
I mean,
it's a part of life.
Any population is going to have disability. Is
That's
going
right.
to have,
It's easy to forget.
I ran into this one guy. He was way far north, actually, and running in a field, but he was wearing like these old school kind of track shorts, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he just kept running back and forth, and I'm just standing there watching him run back and forth. I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, I'm training for the Olympics, and he was serious, but he had crossed the border without inspection, so I had to arrest him. But
there are people, I guess.
So what was happening at that time for people who were iwi, who entered without inspection? Like, what were they? Parole?
So that was
were
before
they, like, what was happening?
1325 was criminal. That was when it was an administrative civil charge. So
Okay.
I've never put anybody in jail for crossing the
for
border
iwi.
illegally.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what
No,
would happen
I
to
think
them?
that
You
that
would
has to be
you would
different.
detain them, and then what? Like,
If they chose, which the majority of them did back then, they chose a voluntary return, or
they
what we
would just
call
cross back over.
Huh.
a VR. We would just send them back to Mexico, and they would be back, the next day or whatever.
Yeah, try again later and not get caught that
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Well,
I remember one night in Tecate, we kept having this one group hit the same sensor, and it was like 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, I was sitting up in a tree waiting on them because they came at the same time every night. And they came again, and I jumped down and I yelled "Chupacabra," which is, and I think you guys have your own version of a chupacabra.
We had the Lugaru. Yeah.
Yeah, the Rugaru. There you go.
Lugaru.
And they laughed, and they were patting me on the back and laughing, and I'm like, how many times are we going to go through this? And they go, are you working tomorrow? And I said, no. And they go, okay.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
And we just laughed about it. It was just what happened. And, the hope was that the government at some point, not knowing a lot about how the policies were affecting people that were crossing.
Gotcha.
My thought was, at some point, they're just going to create, more border passes so people can come and work. What's the big deal?
Right.
And it just never happened. And then,
Now
of course,
it got
once the
tighter
wall
and tighter.
came up, we created the people used to just come here and work and then go back home. Now, when you have a wall there, they get stuck on this side.
Yeah.
So then they have to bring their families, and they have to bring their relatives and stuff, and that's how that all started. So.
Gotcha.
Interesting. Jen, this has been eye-opening.
I know.
I hope people listening.
For this opportunity.
No, I'm so glad. I mean, it's just kind of surreal, to be honest with you. I mean, we're really excited about this series and excited that you were the first one in this series that we're doing right now. We're reaching out a little further than we normally do and pushing the signal out a little further. And so, I mean, we're going to try to talk to people like you who can bring some insight into our area about things that maybe we hear about, but we don't actually get to experience.
Know a lot about,
living,
from a nuanced insider's perspective.
Yeah, so this has been really great. There is one last question. And we'll be sending you one of these in the mail, actually.
I was
say, how does
she get her mug?
I know, right? Everybody that's been on the show gets a Find the Good News mug. But on the back is the last question of the day. And it's a question that was born when I started going home and realizing that I would go home at night and ask my kids to tell me about their day. And I realized that sometimes we could slide off and maybe to like, oh, this happened at school and this bad thing. And I realized how often we are attracted to negativity. It's so delicious and we want to get stuck in it and keep talking about it. So I started reframing the question. Instead, when I go home, I say, did anything good happen today? And so I ask every guest, or most every guest on the show, that last question to take with them.
Did anything happen good in my day?
Yeah.
You know what happened that was really good is two people, they did ask me a little bit about, the truth of the border and my time in the Border Patrol, which is a bit negative at times, but they really asked me what can be done and read about what can be done and looked at the positive aspects of immigration and talked about it and didn't say, well, but, so it's hard. It's like, I work with the Southern Borders, and I'm an ambassador for them, and also with Define American, and it's hard as an ex-agent because everybody wants to know all the juicy stories and all that stuff.
Right.
But there's also a lot of really good stories, and there's a lot of really good plans and a lot of really good people that are down here on the border. And every single person that I get to talk to and tell about that then can share it with somebody else.
That's wonderful.
That is
yes. Awesome. God, that motivates me, actually, because that's what we want to do with the show. I want to share this with people. I want them to meet you. I mean, I've watched your interviews and I've read some of the things you've written, and that was kind of why I wanted to be your friend on Facebook, and see and follow your work, but to actually get to visit with you and hear those stories directly from you, I'd hoped to maybe do something a little different today than what I'd seen in some of the other interviews. And as you said, they're very short. A lot of times on TV, it's very short. You got 10, maybe 7 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah. And
if
so
you're lucky.
if you're lucky,
Might
right.
get 45 seconds. Right.
Right.
7 minutes with, like 4 other panelists.
Well,
So
panelists,
Yeah.
that's right. And no telling what they're going to ask. And I've watched so many of those things. I thought, man, you just can't get a good deep dive in this format.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
You know?
I don't even bother with cable news at all.
So it was great to be able to do this and just, I don't know, it was enlightening.
Yeah, I think this is where it's at, and for people that can't get out, this is a good thing for them to listen to, and then just getting out in the community and talking more about it. And that's what I do. I mean, that's what I do is just talk about this stuff, and come at it and listen to other people's viewpoints and what they're afraid of, and try and talk about it instead of just sitting around with our ugliness,
Yeah, for sure. I loved your tone today. I mean, I just been thinking that this whole time. I was like, you had to talk about some stuff that maybe some of it's ugly and some of it's hard and painful, but your tone the whole time has been, it wasn't malicious. And that's beautiful, because so often I hear malicious tones, in the world.
Yeah.
And you didn't speak with that at all.
It wasn't just not malicious for the sake of like civility. It was like actually hopeful.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Right.
You weren't just being, trying to be peaceable. You were just telling the truth in a kind, like you said, a hopeful, constructive way. Yeah, love that.
I try.
That's what I love.
And
That's what I love
everything-
about following you. Also,
So funny when I get that, because I get that.
You don't know that
I'm
you're
getting that
famous.
more and more, and I'm just like,
you don't know that you're famous, but you are.
Yeah, I mean, really and truly, it is interesting. I mean, you don't ever. I love it. I love that about you, that you're like, hey, I'm just gonna do this thing, and the fact that it comes back on you and people are like knowing you. I'm sure that's a strange experience, right? I mean,
it is. It's very odd, and especially it's funny. People are like, they'll introduce. I'll be on a panel and they'll say, Jose Diaz from blah blah blah, and someone from blah blah blah, and they're like, and Jenn Budd, and I'm like, and I'm just by myself.
Well, it is interesting how perception works. I mean, because I'm guilty, and I don't mind admitting that. But like, I remember when, I think it might have been through some of Laura's messages and posts, is where I first saw your work and your voice. And most people introduce you as former Border Patrol senior, agent Jenn Budd. And in light of the what's going on with the border and how hot of a topic it is, the first assumption for me was, oh, she just quit.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it was like, oh, she got sick of all this bull crap and like quit over this. And so I had told somebody else that you were coming on the show, and I mean, I had gotten past my initial perception of that, and they were like, oh, that's awesome. So she's like whistleblowing about all the stuff going on. I go, well, hang on.
Right.
See, it's this perception like it's all just happening now. And I think it gets back into politicizing it. Everybody's throwing all this, and I'm no Trump fan, okay, but I also want to be honest. I mean, people throw all of it on Donald Trump.
Right.
You know what I mean?
We
And
want
you're
our country
honest
to be
about that.
But
successful no
Donald
matter
Trump
who
could
the
not have been
president is.
elected without a culture that that made the bed.
Right.
And definitely our policing culture, and that includes, I think, our Border Patrol,
But the
was
Border
involved in
Patrol's
that.
had problems since, obviously since I was in, and that's literally why I left. I didn't, I have had some people say, well, it was easy for you to sit there and say people should leave because, you left when you wanted to leave. And it's like, no. I didn't leave when I wanted to leave.
Right.
I left because my life was in danger, and I went and worked in a cabinet shop for minimum wage sweeping floors. So don't give me that.
Yeah, right.
Entire career.
Yeah, you didn't just leave to all of a sudden make yourself some crazy whistleblower celebrity that's going to get all these endorsements and write a book and all
later
that.
Before you ever really spoke out about it.
Yeah. That's kind of why I wanted to bring that up, because I think sometimes people can dump that or have a misperception like I did initially and go, oh, well, this is just a hot topic, and now all of a sudden, right.
Blow the whistle.
And I do think if I had done that back then, I would have had a lot more animosity and a lot more anger from my personal perspective. I am angry with them that so many people have died in their custody, and I am angry with them how they're separating families. But my anger towards them isn't from what I went through as an agent. That's just something that I use because it's still relevant today.
When you have the insiders, nuanced
right. I'm not looking for justice for anything that happened to me at the time.
Right.
That's long and gone, and that's fine. But so I'm also, I think, blessed in that I did have that time to cool down and to deal with it and to reflect upon it and stuff. So
we always try to judo flip. That's something I say a lot in the show is Aikido. Aikido is the redirection of energy and a way of doing that. And so we try to do that with most conversations. How can we take, especially recently, like for instance, Donald Trump came to town. And he had a rally here in Lake Charles, which I was like, wow, he's actually in our town having a rally. And so there was a lot of hot-tempered stuff going on. And I noticed online on Facebook, a lot of my friends were just getting kind of volatile, saying some nasty stuff about him and becoming almost just an opposite reflection of his base. And I thought, this is the trap we don't want to fall into, is to where we begin to use his methods to get our message across, because then we're just becoming that, and I don't want to be that. I'd rather redirect it in another way. So this show is kind of our little attempt at that, I guess. And we all have our moments. I have my moments too. I'm prone to anger faster than I am any other emotion, I think, a lot of times. So and I think a lot of that comes from my upbringing and everything. But it's. My wife is so funny. She says, "Who are you?" So sometimes now I'm like, "Well, maybe they meant this," and she's like, because my wife's just like the nicest person in the world. But when people get that riled up and stuff, it's just not worth it. They need to calm down, and then we can revisit it later.
I really don't think justice can be pursued without righteous anger. So I think you have to baptize your anger and use it.
I understand what you're saying. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were saying more that, unnecessary anger and calling.
Name calling.
Yeah, name calling. I was seeing some of that behavior, and I thought, well, this is not, even though I probably would lean on that person's side of it, the tactic becomes the same.
When we're making fun of people, or and that's what I'm saying. Like when they started separating children, I was like, y'all need to lay down your badges and your guns. That's just it. You got to say
right.
And so that is that righteous anger coming out. I think that's important, and it is certainly different for me, being that I am a white woman, so I have to give people their space too. At the same time.
Yeah.
What I ended up doing when he was here was going to a birthday party for the 5-year-old daughter of a friend from Honduras, and everybody there was Honduran and Salvadoran, and we had delicious food.
Well, see, you're in like what she said right there to
we couldn't even hear Donald Trump, even though we weren't that far from downtown, because we had our own party going on, and
it fits right in.
I loved that everybody there was just so unapologetically part of this community.
Yeah. And people like him, what he wants more than anything, and a lot of his followers, they want the press, and that's why he does it.
Yeah, sure.
And the most hurtful thing you can do for him is go, then turn away and walk away.
Yeah, that's actually, unfortunately, that's how you deal with a lot of people like that, and he's in that classic zone. I mean, that's exactly what we decided to do too. Was like, look, hey, let's have a night with good people, and have a peaceful night, and not fill our minds with this kind of stuff. We're all indoctrinated into us versus them mentality from grade school on. I mean, it's sort of put into us. And so my son and I were talking about that. We were talking after watching that thing with the Watchmen. I was like, well, that was 1921, so that was 98 years ago. And then the 60s, we're going, okay, that's only 59 years ago. And it's like, we're not in these big blasts. We're still within the blast zone of that, and hopefully each generation, we hope gets better and better and can wash that stuff out. All right. Well, this is great. Do you encourage people to contact you and reach out to you, Jen, or and follow your work?
I had somebody on Twitter private message me and say that her sister was killed by a drunk driver who was undocumented, and that she's been asked to join, that side and stuff, but she doesn't think that all migrants are bad. And she said, "How do you feel about that?" And I said, first of all, I'm so sorry that this happened to you. And But you're right. No, not all migrants are bad. And even people who come across that are good people sometimes make bad decisions.
Right.
And, and so we can't protect ourselves 100% of the time, but we can try and do our best. And if we do it with good intentions and we stay true to our core values and think about why it is we do some things, and I think we'll, for the most part, be good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I encourage people to reach out to me.
Yeah. Is there a preferred method for you? I mean, do you have like a Twitter handle, Instagram handle, Facebook? Was that your best methods, or is there a better way for folks to find out about you and your work, your message?
I think Facebook is good, at Jenn Budd, JENNBUDD. And then on Twitter, it's backwards because somebody has Jenn Budd already. It's Bud Jenn. So a lot of people, because my short hair, think I'm a guy, but it's BUDDJENN. So
okay,
yeah,
we'll put links in the show description with all of that on there too.
Cool.
Yeah,
I do appreciate it. I hope this has been a good experience, and I really do thank you for your time.
It has been a very good experience. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate you amplifying the voice of the Southern Borders and all the work that they've been doing. So
yeah, well, we'll continue to do that, and I hope that this has been good.
Yes, it has.
Thank you for letting me hop in.
She was excited when I told her that we were having a talk.
Like, did anything good happen today? I got to help interview Jenn
I'm going to be honest. She said, when I messaged her, I go, hey, I was like, you're friends with Jenn Budd on Facebook, right? And she was like, yeah. And I was like, well, she's going to be coming on Find the Good News. And her next message is, OMG, what?
And then I said, can I come?
Can I come?
I love you just as well.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Jenn Budd. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can help me grow the signal by becoming an early riser patron at patreon.com/findthegoodnews. Sharing this episode with a kind review is a great way to help as well. I thank you deeply for pressing play.